Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the story. Let's start. Alexander Alex Carrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying the city skyline. At 42, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. As the CEO of an international logistics company, Alex had built his empire through a relentless need for control and perfection. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your son is here to see you." "Send him in," Alex replied, his stern expression softening slightly. 10-year-old Max bounded into the room, Claire's iPhone clutched in his small hands. "Dad, what's a prenup?" Alex froze, his blood running cold. "Where did you hear that word, Max?" "It was in Mom's email," Max said innocently, holding up the phone. With forced casualness, Alex took the device from his son. His heart nearly stopped as he saw the email chain between Claire and her divorce lawyer. They were plotting to leave him, waiting for his father's inheritance. But something had changed. "Max, why don't you go play in my secretary's office for a bit?" Alex said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to your mother." As Max left, Alex strode purposefully toward the elevator, his mind racing. He found Claire in their sprawling penthouse, lounging on a chaise with a fashion magazine. "Care to explain this?" Alex said, tossing the phone onto the coffee table. Claire's face drained of color as she saw the screen. She snatched the phone, her eyes darting between it and Alex. "How dare you look through my private emails?" "Our son found it," Alex replied coldly. "Now explain." Claire's shoulders sagged, then straightened as a cold smile played across her lips. "I was waiting for your dad's inheritance," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "But plans change now." Alex felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. But he wasn't done. With a smile, he pulled out his own phone, showing Claire a series of damning photos. Her locked in an intimate embrace with Mark, one of his top employees and an old friend. "You won't get a dime," Alex said softly. "You cheated. Remember the prenup?" Claire's shocked silence gave way to disbelief. "How do you know?" Without hesitation, Alex's voice turned to ice. "You're done. Pack your things. Tonight." Claire, panicked, began to realize the magnitude of her mistake. But it was too late. Alex had already turned his back, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. Mark Stevens sat in a dimly lit bar, nursing his third whiskey of the night. His phone buzzed incessantly, Claire's name flashing on the screen with increasingly frantic messages. He knew their plan had unraveled spectacularly. Across town, Claire paced in a luxury hotel room, her designer luggage a stark contrast to her disheveled appearance. She'd underestimated Alex, but she wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, Alex strode into Carrington Logistics, employees scattering before his thunderous expression. In his office, he immediately called his head of security. "I want Mark Stevens' access revoked. All of it. Now." His voice left no room for questions, but Mark was already a step ahead. Before his access was cut, he'd managed to funnel sensitive business information to several of Carrington Logistics' biggest competitors. Claire, meanwhile, was plotting her own revenge. With her sharp social skills, she began reaching out to her extensive network, spreading rumors about Alex's crumbling empire and tarnishing his once flawless image. As Alex sat in his office, reviewing the damage reports, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Victor Zorin on line 1 for you." Alex's eyes narrowed. Victor Zorin, the ruthless Russian oligarch who'd been eyeing his company for years. He picked up the phone, his voice cool and controlled. "Zorin, what can I do for you?" "Ah, Alexander." Zorin's heavily accented voice oozed false sympathy. "I heard about your recent troubles. Perhaps now is a good time to discuss that merger we've been dancing around." Alex's grip tightened on the phone. "Carrington Logistics is not for sale, Zorin. Not now, not ever." As he hung up, Alex realized he wasn't just fighting a personal betrayal. This was a direct threat to his entire empire. Alex sat across from Liam Quinn, a brilliant but morally ambiguous investigator he'd hired to dig up dirt on Claire, Mark, and Zoran. Liam's findings were worse than he'd imagined. They've been stealing from the company for months, Liam explained, sliding a file across the desk. They plan to bankrupt you, destroy your empire, and flee the country with the spoils. Alex's jaw clenched as he reviewed the evidence. At that moment, his phone rang. It was his CFO. "Sir, we have a problem. Zoran's just launched a series of strategic moves that's crippling our supply chain." Hanging up, Alex knew he had to act fast. He arranged an emergency meeting with Zoran at an exclusive private club. The Russian oligarch sat across from him, smug and overconfident. "Your company is on its knees, Alexander. I'm offering to buy you out at a fraction of its worth. It's more than generous, considering the circumstances." Alex leaned forward. "You underestimate me, Zoran. This isn't over." As he left the meeting, Alex's mind was already formulating a plan. He'd not only survive this onslaught, but annihilate all his enemies in the process. Back at his office, Alex initiated his counterattack. Using the evidence Liam had uncovered, he filed a countersuit against Claire and Mark, accusing them of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He then began systematically removing Mark's influence from within the company, firing his associates and cutting off his access to company funds. It was a surgical strike, precise and devastating. As night fell over the city, Alex stood at his office window, looking out at the empire he'd built. The battle had only just begun, but Alexander Carrington was a man who played to win, and win he would, no matter the cost. Claire Carrington stood in the middle of her rented apartment, surrounded by designer luggage that looked out of place in the modest space. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her phone screen as she scrolled through her contacts. She needed an ally, someone who could help her turn the tables on Alex. Her finger hovered over a name, Andrea Wells, investigative journalist. A cold smile played across Claire's lips as she hit the call button. "Andrea, it's Claire Carrington. I have a story for you. How'd you like an exclusive on the dark side of Alexander Carrington's empire?" Across town, Alex sat in his office, reviewing the latest reports on the damage Claire and Mark had done. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Ms. Wells from the Tribune on line 1. She's asking for a comment on some allegations." Alex's eyes narrowed. So, the war had begun in earnest. He picked up the phone, his voice cool and controlled. "Ms. Wells, what can I do for you?" As Andrea laid out the accusations, corruption, abusive leadership, shady dealings, Alex listened silently, his mind already formulating a counter-strategy. When she finished, he spoke only 2 words. No comment. He hung up and immediately dialed Liam Quinn. "I need everything you've got on Claire and Mark. Now." Days passed, and the city buzzed with rumors. Headlines screamed of Alex's alleged misdeeds, each more damning than the last. Claire watched from the sidelines, a smug smile on her face as she fed Andrea a steady stream of half-truths and fabrications. Mark, still smarting from his humiliating exit from Carrington Logistics, provided insider details that lent credibility to their claims. But Claire wasn't satisfied with merely tarnishing Alex's reputation. She wanted to hit him where it truly hurt. "I want full custody of Max," she told her lawyer, her voice hard. "Paint Alex as an unfit father. Use whatever means necessary." Max, caught in the crossfire, retreated into himself. At school, he overheard whispers about his father, saw the pitying looks from teachers. At home with Alex, he felt the tension, the barely contained fury that radiated from his father. He didn't understand what was happening, only that his world was falling apart. Alex, for his part, had anticipated this move. As Claire's lawyer filed for emergency custody, Alex's team was ready with a counterpunch. They leaked their own story to the press. A sordid tale of Claire's affair, her theft from the company, her manipulation of Max for her own gain. The public sympathy, fickle as always, began to shift. Claire found herself on the receiving end of scathing editorials and vicious social media posts. Her carefully cultivated image as the wronged wife crumbled. In the courtroom, Alex's lawyers were relentless. They presented evidence of Claire's infidelity, her attempts to circumvent the prenup, her plans to flee the country with company funds. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steely eyes, listened impassively. When the gavel fell, Claire's world collapsed. Custody is awarded to the father, Alexander Carrington. The mother, Claire Carrington, is granted supervised visitation pending further review. Claire stumbled from the courtroom, her designer heels clicking on the marble floors. Outside, a sea of reporters waited, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. She pushed past them, her face a mask of despair and rage. Alex emerged moments later, Max's small hand clutched in his. He faced the cameras, his expression grim but composed. "Justice has been served," he said simply. "My son and I asked for privacy during this difficult time." As they drove away, Max looked up at his father. "Dad, is it over now?" Alex's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Not yet, son," he said softly, "but it will be soon." Mark Stevens sat in a dingy motel room, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and crumpled papers. His laptop glowed in the dim light, displaying financial reports and internal memos from Carrington Logistics. He'd been poring over them for days, looking for a weakness, any chink in Alex's armor. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered warily. "Stevens. Mr. Stevens." The voice was heavily accented Russian. "I believe we have a mutual interest in Alexander Carrington's downfall." Mark sat up straighter. "Who is this?" "A friend. One who can provide the resources you need to finish what you started." It was Zoran. Mark's mind raced. This was it. His last chance to strike back at Alex. "I'm listening," he said. Across the city, in his penthouse office, Alex was in the middle of a video conference when alarms began blaring from his computer. Red warning messages flashed across multiple screens. "Sir," his head of IT's panicked voice came through the speakers. "We're under attack. Massive data breaches. Our logistics software is compromised. Shipments are being rerouted." Alex's face hardened. He'd been expecting this, but the scale of the attack was beyond anything he'd anticipated. "Initiate Protocol Omega," he ordered. "Now!" As Carrington Logistics descended into chaos, Alex remained eerily calm. He watched as shipments were delayed, contracts were breached, and the company's stock price plummeted. His phone rang incessantly, board members, partners, media outlets all demanding answers. In his secret command center, buried deep beneath the Carrington Tower, Alex monitored the situation. Liam Quinn stood beside him, relaying real-time intelligence. "It's Mark," Liam confirmed. "He's working with a team of elite hackers. But there's more. He's got backing from Zoran. Serious backing." Alex nodded, unsurprised. "And our countermeasures?" Liam grinned, a predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "In place and ready. Just say the word." Alex's finger hovered over a button on the console before him. He thought of Claire, of Mark, of all those who had betrayed him, of Max, caught in the middle of this war. His jaw clenched. "Execute," he said. Across the city, in his motel room, Mark was celebrating. His laptop showed the carnage unfolding at Carrington Logistics. Zoran was on speakerphone, his satisfaction evident even through the tinny sound. "Excellent work, Mr. Stevens," Zoran purred. "Carrington is finished. I'll have my people draw up the acquisition papers immediately." Mark grinned, pouring himself another drink. "Here's to the fall of Alexander Carrington," he toasted. But as he raised a glass to his lips, his screen went black. Then, line by line, text began to appear. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Mark?" Mark's blood ran cold. He recognized that writing style. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." His phone died. The lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, Mark heard heavy footsteps approaching his door. Zoran, in his lavish Moscow office, frowned as his connection with Mark was suddenly cut. He barked orders at his subordinates, demanding to know what was happening. But as reports began flooding in of frozen assets, of raids on his properties, of arrest warrants issued in multiple countries, he realized with growing horror that he'd underestimated Alexander Carrington for the last time. Back in New York, Alex watched impassively as FBI agents let a handcuffed Mark from the motel. On another screen, he saw Zoran being escorted from his office by Russian authorities. Liam whistled low. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, boss." Alex didn't respond. He stared at the screens, at the empire he'd saved, at the enemies he'd destroyed. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt empty. His phone buzzed. A text from Max. "Dad, when are you coming home?" Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. "It's over," he said softly. "Let's go home." Claire Carrington stood in the lobby of Carrington Tower, her designer outfit a stark contrast to her haggard appearance. She clutched her handbag like a lifeline as she approached the receptionist. "I need to see Alex, Mr. Carrington," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please, it's urgent." The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition, but she kept her composure. "One moment, please." In his office, Alex was reviewing the final reports on the Zoran takedown when his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your ex-wife is here to see you." Alex's jaw clenched. He considered turning her away, but curiosity won out. "Send her up." When Claire entered, Alex was standing by the window, his back to her. She took a hesitant step forward. "Alex, Save it." He cut her off, turning to face her. His eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or recognition. "What do you want, Claire?" She flinched at his tone, but pressed on. "I've made a terrible mistake. I see that now. I'll leave Mark. I'll do anything. Please, just give me another chance." Alex laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made Claire step back. "Another chance? You tried to destroy me, Claire. You used our son as a pawn in your little game. And now what? You think you can bat your eyelashes and all will be forgiven." He moved to his desk, pressing a button. A holographic display sprang to life, showing social media feeds, news articles, financial reports. "You're done, Claire. Your name is mud in every circle that matters. No one will hire you, partner with you, or even be seen with you in public." Claire's face crumpled as the reality of her situation sank in. "What have you done?" she whispered. "I've ruined you," Alex said simply. "Just like you tried to ruin me. The difference is I succeeded." Tears streamed down Claire's face as she sank into a chair. "What about Max? He needs his mother." Alex's expression hardened further. "You lost the right to call yourself his mother when you used him to try and hurt me. He's better off without you." As if on cue, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Mark's lawyer. "Client willing to make deal. Full confession in exchange for reduced sentence." Alex showed the message to Claire, watching as the last bit of fight left her eyes. "It's over, Claire. Mark's going to prison, and he's taking what's left of your reputation with him." Claire stood on shaky legs, her world collapsing around her. As she reached the door, Alex spoke one last time. "Oh, and Claire, I bought out the Tribune. Andrea Wells won't be writing any more stories about me or you." The door closed behind her with a final, damning click. Alex turned back to the window, looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt hollow. His phone buzzed again. "Max! Dad, can we have pizza tonight?" A small smile tugged at Alex's lips. Perhaps not completely hollow after all. In a maximum security prison upstate, Mark Stevens sat in his cell, staring at the blank wall. His lawyer had just left, confirming that his plea deal had been accepted. He'd spend the next decade behind bars, but at least he'd avoided the life sentence Zoran was facing. As night fell over New York, 3 lives lay in ruins. Claire, once the toast of society, now a pariah, wandering the streets with nowhere to go. Mark, locked away, his ambitions turned to ash. And Zoran, his vast criminal empire dismantled, facing justice in a Russian court. And at the top of it all stood Alexander Carrington, the man who had orchestrated their downfall. He had won, utterly and completely. Victor Zorin stood at the window of his Moscow penthouse, a glass of vodka in his hand, staring out at the city lights. His reflection in the glass showed a man consumed by fury and obsession. Alexander Carrington had humiliated him, dismantled his operations, and left him a shell of his former self. But Zorin was far from finished. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "It's done. The syndicate is ready." Zorin's lips curled into a cold smile. He'd spent months rebuilding his network, calling in favors from the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. Now, backed by an influential Eastern European crime syndicate, he was ready to strike back at Carrington with a vengeance. Across the ocean, Alex Carrington sat in his office, reviewing quarterly reports. The past few months had been quiet, too quiet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, we have a situation." Alex's eyes narrowed. "What kind of situation?" "Sir, we're under attack. Massive cyber attacks across all our systems. Our firewalls are failing." Alex's jaw clenched. He'd been waiting for this. Initiate Protocol Omega. Now. But as the hours ticked by, it became clear that this was no ordinary attack. Zorin had learned from his past mistakes. This time, he wasn't just targeting Carrington Logistics. He was going after Alex's entire empire. Banks reported suspicious activities in Alex's accounts. Stock prices plummeted as sensitive information was leaked to the media. Investors panicked, pulling out in droves. Alex stood in his war room, surrounded by screens displaying the chaos unfolding across his businesses. Liam Quinn burst in. "Boss, it's worse than we thought. Zorin's got a team of corrupt lawyers filing international lawsuits against us. Environmental damage, labor violations, you name it. They're trying to bleed us dry." Alex's mind raced, calculating moves and countermoves. But before he could respond, another alert blared. "Sir," his head of security's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've detected an unauthorized entry at your private residence." "Max." The line went dead. For the first time in years, Alex felt a cold fear grip his heart. "Get me to the house. Now." The drive to his mansion was a blur. As they approached, Alex saw signs of a struggle. Broken glass, overturned furniture. He charged inside, calling for his son. "Dad!" Max's voice came from upstairs. Alex took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into his son's room. Max was huddled in a corner, shaken but unharmed. Near the window lay a man in black, unconscious. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, pulling Max into a tight embrace. Max nodded, his voice muffled against his father's chest. "I remember what you taught me, about being prepared." Alex's throat tightened with a mixture of pride and guilt. He'd taught his son to be strong, to be a survivor. But at what cost? As security swarmed the house, Alex's phone rang. Unknown number, Mr. Carrington. Zorin's voice, smooth as silk. "I trust won't have your attention now." Alex's voice was cold fury. "You've made a grave mistake, Zorin." "Oh, I don't think so. This is just the beginning. I'm going to take everything from you, Carrington. Your money, your power, your legacy. And when you have nothing left, when you're broken and begging for mercy, then I'll end you." The line went dead. Alex looked at Max, still clinging to him, then at the chaos around them. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had he underestimated Zorin? Had his arrogance put everything and everyone he cared about at risk? But as quickly as it came, the doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, implacable resolve. Zorin wanted a war. He'd give him one. Alex turned to Liam, who stood waiting for orders. "Call the team. It's time we finish this, once and for all." The safe house was a nondescript brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, its basement converted into a high-tech command center. Alex sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors and operatives. Liam Quinn stood at his right hand, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "All right," Alex said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Zoran thinks he's got us on the ropes. It's time we show him how wrong he is. Liam, what have you got?" Liam tapped a tablet, and holographic displays sprang to life around the room. "We've identified the key players in Zoran's syndicate, his money men, his enforcers, his political connections. They're spread across Eastern Europe and Asia, but they all report to this man." A photo appeared, a severe-looking man with cold eyes. Dmitry Volkov, Zoran's right-hand man and the architect of the cyber attacks against us. Alex studied the face, committing it to memory. "And our plan, we hit them where it hurts," Liam said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "We've got teams ready to move on their money laundering operations in Cyprus, their weapon caches in Ukraine, their drug routes through Turkey. When we're done, Zoran's entire network will be in chaos." Alex nodded, then turned to his head of legal affairs. "And the lawsuits?" The lawyer smiled thinly. "We've got countersuits ready to file in every jurisdiction. More importantly, we've uncovered evidence of judicial bribery. When this gets out, half the judges on Zoran's payroll will be facing charges of their own." One by one, Alex's team laid out their strategies. Financial attacks to freeze Zoran's assets. Media campaigns to turn public opinion. Backdoor diplomacy to ensure international cooperation in taking down the syndicate. As the meeting wound down, Alex stood. "You all know what's at stake here. Zoran thinks he can destroy everything we've built. We're going to show him the true meaning of destruction. Execute the plan. No mercy, no quarter." The team dispersed, each member heading out to set the gears of Alex's counterattack in motion. But as they filed out, Liam hung back. "Boss, there's one more thing," he said, his voice low. "I think I've found a way to lure Zoran out into the open, but it's risky." Alex raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Liam outlined his plan. A false lead about a multi-billion-dollar deal in Dubai. Too tempting for Zoran to resist. But it would require Alex to put himself in the line of fire. "It's dangerous," Liam finished. "But if it works, we can end this once and for all." Alex was silent for a long moment, weighing the risks. Then he nodded. "Do it, but make sure Max is secure. I won't let Zoran use him against me again." As Liam left to set the trap, Alex stood alone in the command center. He thought of Claire, of Mark, of all the enemies he'd vanquished to get here. Zoran was just the latest in a long line of those who'd underestimated him. He'd be the last. Thousands of miles away, in a luxurious Moscow apartment, Zoran received an encrypted message. His eyes widened as he read the details of Carrington's supposed deal in Dubai. "Prepare the jet," he barked at his assistant. "We're going to the Middle East." The pieces were in place. The final battle was about to begin. Days later, Alex stood in the opulent lobby of Dubai's most exclusive hotel, surrounded by the world's business elite. The trap was set. Now all he had to do was wait for Zoran to take the bait. He didn't have to wait long. A commotion at the entrance drew his attention. Victor Zoran strode in, flanked by bodyguards, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on Alex. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the crowded lobby. Then Zoran smiled, a cold, predatory grin, and began making his way towards Alex. But before he could reach him, chaos erupted. Police swarmed in from every entrance, shouting orders in Arabic and English. Zoran's face contorted in rage as he realized he'd been set up. "Carrington!" he roared, lunging forward. But it was too late. Officers tackled him to the ground, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Alex watched him passively as Zoran was led away, still shouting threats and obscenities. It was over. The man who had threatened everything he held dear was finished. As the dust settled, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Liam. "It's done. Volkov and the others are in custody. The syndicate is finished." Alex allowed himself a small smile. He'd won. Again. But as he looked around at the chaos he'd orchestrated, he felt no joy, no triumph. just a hollow emptiness. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Max, Dad. Are you okay? When are you coming home? Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. It was time to go home. Time to face the consequences of the world he'd created. Months passed. The world watched in awe as Victor Zorin's criminal empire crumbled, its tentacles severed one by one. Alexander Carrington emerged from the ashes stronger than ever, his company's stock soaring to unprecedented heights. Alex stood in his newly renovated office, looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. The skyline was dotted with buildings bearing the Carrington name, a testament to his expanding empire. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, not turning around. Max entered, now a young man of 16, the spitting image of his father. "The board is waiting, Dad. They're ready for your presentation on the Zorin acquisitions." Alex nodded, allowing himself a small smile. He'd taken control of Zorin's legitimate business assets, expanding his reach into markets he'd only dreamed of before. His strategic mind had thrived in the aftermath of his victory, turning near defeat into unparalleled success. As they walked to the boardroom, Alex studied his son. Max had witnessed the darker side of his rise to power, had seen the ruthlessness required to survive in this world. But he'd also seen his father's intelligence, his resilience, his unwavering determination. "Remember, Max," Alex said as they paused outside the boardroom, "in this world, you're either the predator or the prey. Always be prepared. Always be 3 steps ahead." Max nodded, his eyes serious. "I know, Dad. You've taught me well." For a moment, Alex saw a flicker of something in his son's eyes, admiration mixed with caution. Max respected his father's strength, his ability to overcome any obstacle. But he was careful not to emulate the cold ruthlessness that had defined Alex's path to the top. As the board meeting progressed, Alex laid out his plans for further expansion. The other executives listened in awe and fear, knowing that to cross Alexander Carrington was to court destruction. He'd proven that with Claire, with Mark, with Zorin. Mercy and forgiveness were weaknesses he could no longer afford. Later that evening, Alex stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand. The city sprawled before him, a glittering testament to his power. For the first time in his life, he felt truly untouchable. He thought back to the day Max had innocently asked about prenups, setting in motion the chain of events that had led him here. He felt no regret for the choices he'd made, the lives he'd destroyed. In his mind, they had been obstacles to overcome, nothing more. The world was a battlefield, and Alexander Carrington had emerged the undisputed victor. As the sun set over his empire, Alex allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his reign, and he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind him, he heard Max's footsteps. His son joined him at the railing, looking out over the city. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Max said softly. "Everything you've built." Alex nodded, putting an arm around his son's shoulders. "And someday, it'll all be yours." Max was silent for a moment, then turned to face his father. "Dad, do you ever wonder, was it worth it? The cost of getting here?" Alex met his son's gaze, seeing in it a warmth and humanity that he himself had long since abandoned. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of doubt, but he pushed it aside. In this world, Max, you take what you want or watch someone else take it from you. I chose to take it. Remember that. Max nodded slowly, turning back to the view. But Alex saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between admiration for his father's achievements and unease at the methods used to attain them. In that moment, Alex realized that while he had conquered the world, there was one thing he might never fully possess: his son's unquestioning allegiance to his worldview. Max would forge his own path, shaped by but not beholden to his father's legacy. And strangely, Alex found he was okay with that. Perhaps it was Max's role to be the one thing his empire had lacked: a moral compass, a reminder of the humanity he'd sacrificed on his climb to the top. As night fell over the city, father and son stood side by side, overlooking the empire they would shape together. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and challenges yet to come. Alexander Carrington had won his war. Now, with Max by his side, it was time to secure his legacy for generations to come. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
After a long and exhausting week of sales calls, spanning 3 of the 5 western states in my territory, I finally returned to my small one-bedroom apartment. The pressure to improve my sales numbers was overwhelming, and I had been rushing from client to client, trying to avert a looming catastrophe. It felt good to be home, but the relief was short-lived. A suitcase full of dirty laundry, a week's worth of unopened mail, and a list of tasks that had piled up awaited me. To top it off, I was gearing up for another week on the road, hitting the remaining 2 states in my territory on Monday. It was 8 p.m. on Friday when I walked through the door, drained but relieved to have a brief respite. I had spent the flight home mentally compiling a list of everything I needed to take care of before my next trip, but that was as far as my planning had gone. The first thing I did, though, wasn't tackling the chores. Instead, I made myself a cold drink, coconut-flavored vodka with shaved ice and cranberry juice. As I took the first sip, I let out a sigh of relief. If only all my problems could be solved that easily. I grabbed my cell phone and pressed the button to connect me to my ex's phone. I had programmed the number into my cell during the past week. Kathy and I had met 2 years before. She liked my looks, my restored car, and the fact that I worked and made pretty good money. I liked her looks, especially her fantastic body, and the fact that she wanted to have sex as much as I did. I was 24 years old when we met, and had never felt like I had enough time for more than a little partying and a few very casual relationships before meeting her. She was 22 years old and looking to settle down after 4 years of heavy partying in college. We met at a party thrown by a college fraternity brother one balmy June Saturday night. 2 hours later, we were lying on my king-size bed, trying to catch our breath after a torrid 20-minute sexual romp. We started really going out together after that, had one of those whirlwind courtships, and 2 months later, we ran off and got married in Las Vegas at a really seedy wedding chapel, drunk as hell, and laughing crazily as a fake Elvis sang us the Hawaiian wedding song. The wedding was really the major highlight of the time we spent married and living together. A few months later, we had a huge fight that began over nothing at all really, and it just kept escalating, picking up in intensity, until suddenly she ended up slapping my face and running out of my apartment, back home to stay with her mother. I woke up the next morning, still pissed at her, and later convinced myself that I really didn't miss having her around that much, and I'd be better off without her. After I deliberately made no attempt to contact her for more than a week, she finally ended up calling me. By the end of that conversation, which consisted mostly of her crying and me shouting, I think we both started to realize that whatever hopes we'd had for being with each other were now finished. She ended up asking me to take care of filing for a divorce, and so I went ahead and complied with her wishes. Since there were no kids or jointly owned real estate, and because neither of us had acquired anything new during our short time together, it was agreed that we just go our separate ways. My parents acted much more upset about the whole thing than either Kathy or I. After the divorce was final, we'd had zero contact until this past week. I had been so busy with my work for the past year and a half that I hadn't made any time to socialize since we split up. I kept meaning to make the time, but had to put it off due to all my travel and the pressures of 2 bad sales years in a row. No one had singled me out for any of the blame for the sales slump as of yet, but it didn't take a genius to know that the company couldn't sit back forever and watch their sales volume keep shrinking in my territory. Kathy had called for the past 3 days and left at least 10 voice messages on my phones. Call me urgent. Need to talk with you right away. Benny, I have to see you immediately. Those kind of messages. I don't hear from her for more than a year, and now, all of a sudden, she has to see me? Hello? Damn, she still had the sexiest voice. Hi, Kathy. It's Benny. You needed to talk to me? Benny. Oh God. Thanks for calling. I was afraid, when you didn't call me back, that you didn't get any of my messages. No, I got them, but I was out of state and just got back 5 minutes ago. What's so important? Benny, I need you to do me a huge favor. It's like a matter of life or death for me. I didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. After a long pause, she did. Benny, after we split up, you knew that I kept the last name Smith? No, I didn't know that, but if my maiden name had been Horsley, I'd have probably done the same thing too. No, I didn't. But it isn't a problem for me. You're welcome to keep it. I still couldn't figure how having my last name would be important to anyone else, or make her so anxious to speak with me. Thanks, it was the only thing I kept from our marriage, and I didn't think you'd mind. The thing is though, Benny, about a year and a half ago I got this job working with the Christian Broadcasting Network as a broadcast editor. I heard her question and assumed it to be rhetorical. I got it because I said I was married, Benny. They don't hire single people usually. It's a family values issue with them or something. Anyway, I love the job, and I'm damn good at it too. In fact, I'm being promoted to be an associate producer. And now, because I'm going to be more easily identified with the network, they insist on meeting my husband. She shut up at that point, and I couldn't seem to outwait her for once. And I don't get the promotion and would probably lose my job if I can't produce my husband. Benny, all I need is for you to show up at a few things over the next couple of weeks. Tomorrow there's a big affiliates convention, and it would be perfect for me to bring you to it and introduce my husband to the bosses. Benny, I know it's asking a lot, but please do this for me. Kathy, you know I'd like to do it for you. But this is really a bad time for you to be asking. I'm just getting in, after a week on the road. I'm only here for 2 days, and then I'm heading back out again early on Monday morning for another week. I'm almost 20% off on meeting my annual quota already, and I'm busting my hump just to try and keep my own job. I've got so many things I need to get done this weekend. I just can't spare the time. Sorry, Kathy. I felt bad, but I really couldn't do it for her. Benny, it would only be for a few hours. The affiliates thing lasts from 6 to 9 or so, and then there's a little dinner afterwards for the network family. You'd be home by 11. I'm only asking for about 6 hours, Benny. If they meet you and they like you, maybe that's all you have to do, and I get my promotion and I'd owe you a big favor for doing it. Kathy, I don't have 6 minutes to spare this weekend, let alone 6 hours. I've got to do so many things that I'll probably miss doing some of them just because there isn't enough time. I only called you back because we have a history together. Your messages are the only calls I'm returning. Sorry, Kathy. I've got to go. Benny, don't hang up. Are you still in that tiny apartment on Delano Street? Yeah, why? I'll come over there right now. I'll help you get things done, so you'll have it all finished in time for Monday. I'll save you more than the time it takes to do what I'm asking. Benny, please, I need this job and I want this promotion. Kathy, I've got to write up my expense account and do my sales summary. You can't help me with that. I've got to balance my checkbook and pay all the charge cards and utilities and things. I've got to get my suits dry cleaned and my other clothes washed and packed for Monday morning. I've got to get Mom and Dad an anniversary present and take it over to them. I've got to get something for Mike and Tammy's wedding, which is next weekend. There's too much to do. I've got to go. Sorry, Kathy. I hope you can work it out some ways for yourself. Bye. I hung up the phone and made another drink. I was sipping at my third drink and working on my expense sheet when I heard an insistent knocking at my door. I got up, thinking it was probably a neighbor, and opened my door to see Kathy. She pushed past me and planted herself firmly in the middle of my living room, arms crossed over her chest, a determined look set on her pretty face. Here's the deal, Benny. I'll stay with you for the whole weekend. I'll make sure everything gets done and you leave Monday with everything done and ready. You give me that time I need and we're even. I won't ask you to help me ever again. We'll help each other. It was the weekend. I was tired and already feeling pretty miserable. I just didn't have enough energy left for arguing with her. I finally just nodded my head in surrender and went back to my chair. I picked up my receipts and my expense notebook and went back to fiddling on my swindle sheet. Kathy quickly disappeared into my bedroom. In a few minutes, she returned with 2 pillowcases full of dirty laundry and 4 of my dirty suits draped over her arm. She opened the apartment door and left. By 10 o'clock, I was worn out. I had most of my sales report finished and my expense sheet was completed, a real work of art. I was dead tired. So I got undressed and went in to lie down on my bed, noticing when I did that Kathy had put on fresh sheets and pillowcases. I was awakened about an hour later by a loud pounding on my door. I got myself up and let Kathy in. She held 3 packages of my laundry in her right hand. It was cleaned and folded, separated neatly into those brown paper wrappings, and tied with strings. My suits were in her left hand, wrapped in those plastic covers, fresh from a dry cleaning place. I took the packages from her and told her I was too tired to tell her any more things to do. I told her I'd see her in the morning, put the laundry in the bedroom on my dresser, and hung up the suits in my closet. As soon as I had done that, I crawled back into my bed and passed out. I woke up at 9 o'clock Saturday morning to the unusual, but very welcome, smell of freshly grilled pancakes coming from my kitchen. The left side of my bed had obviously been slept in, so I didn't have to wonder where Kathy had spent the night. There was another suitcase, one I'd never seen before, lying on the floor next to my bathroom. I wondered when she brought that in. I went in and took a shower and took care of my morning ablutions. I put on some casual clothes and walked out to my breakfast. The pancakes were tasty, the orange juice cold and tart, the coffee was fresh perked and sure didn't taste like the crap I made at home. I tried to think whether Kathy had ever cooked a meal for me while we were married, and I couldn't remember if she had or not. We used to eat out all the time. This is great, Kathy. Thanks a lot. I didn't know you cooked. Glad you like it. What can I do for you now? You said something about some presents? I told her about my parents having an anniversary this coming week and wanting to get them something special. It was their 30th. She asked what my budget range was, and I told her a couple $100 max. I told her where Mike and Tammy had registered for gifts for their wedding next weekend, and off she went, all my ready cash in her purse, seeming very happy to do the gift shopping. After she left, I walked over to my desk to finish up my sales report and summary. On top of the pile of stuff I'd left last night was my checkbook, 7 envelopes addressed and stamped with checks written out and needing only my signature. Underneath that were my last 4 bank statements, all with a written reconciliation on the back. I opened my check register and saw that Kathy had updated everything, including my direct deposited paid checks from the time of my last update some 3 or 4 months previously. I signed the checks and sealed them inside the envelopes. Another chore I'd been putting off and dreading safely accomplished. It took me another hour to finish up my sales report and summary. I decided to also write up a long overdue sales forecast and projection in which I detailed some of the reasons why I thought sales were off in my territory and plans that I had formulated to try to improve my results in the near term. I faxed everything into my home office, hopeful that the coming week's sales orders would compare favorably to those projections I'd now given. I sat back in my chair and took a moment to reflect on how much better I was suddenly feeling. Everything I'd really needed to get done this weekend, other than visiting with my folks, packing my suitcase and suit bag, was already done. I called over to my mom and dad's house and talked with them for a few minutes. I asked them if I could come over sometime on Sunday, just to see them and say hello. They said sure, that they'd be in all day. My dad asked me if everything was okay with me. He has always worried that I worked too hard and didn't make enough effort to enjoy things as much as some of his friends' children seemed to. By the time Kathy got back at 1, I was relaxing in my recliner, having a beer and watching a ball game on the tube. She had 2 large packages, all gift-wrapped, and 2 occasion cards for the wedding and the anniversary. I got your parents a down comforter for their bed and a hand-crocheted tablecloth for their dining room table. For Mike and Tammy, I got a nice set of cookware that was on their gift registry list. It was listed at $349, but I got it on a deep sale discount for just under $200. It's a great starter set, and they can easily add to it because the manufacturer has a full line of cookware products. As you can see, it is all gift-wrapped. All you need is to sign the cards. Kathy, I want to thank you for what you've already done for me. To be honest, I had no idea you were so efficient and capable when we were together. I guess I never really paid much attention to things other than your pretty face and your great body. I'm impressed and, at the same time, a little bit embarrassed that I never gave any thought to you possessing skills and competencies. Thank you, Ben. That might be the nicest compliment I've ever gotten from a guy. So, what's next on your bottomless list? Well, I've finished all the necessary reports for work. I still need to set up a good itinerary for my sales stops next week. I'll do that Sunday night. I already called and set up a visit with my parents for tomorrow in the early afternoon. I guess all I need to do is go with you to your work thing and figure out how to get myself laid before I leave here on Monday morning. Get laid? You actually budgeted time to get laid? How do you usually go about doing that? Well, usually, I go out on Saturday night, find a pretty girl and sweet talk her into coming home with me. Once I get her here, I give her the grand tour and boom, the next thing you know, she's all over me, and in a matter of minutes, I'm getting laid. It's really pretty simple actually, almost foolproof. Only problem is, I promised my ex-wife that I'd use those very hours, prime stalking hours I might add, that I'd need to find a pretty girl, to help her with her problem instead. And now I guess I'll just have to wait another week before taking care of my little problem. I had no idea you had it down to such an exact formula. Does it really work that easily for you? Every time. Really, every time?
Yep.
So when's the last time you did it? Went out on a Saturday night and found a pretty girl and brought her home. It's been a while. I've really been busy, and I'm on the road way more often than I'm at home. Doesn't it work on the road too? Oh, no. It only works at home. It must be something about the apartment that just gets to them. 5-minute tour and then, lights out, a done deal. Well, don't you bother to get any of their phone numbers? Can't you call one of them tomorrow and set up a little Sunday night tour and reunion? Only works once, Kathy, and only on a Saturday night. I really don't know why, but that's how it works. It's really kind of complex and mystical. It might possibly have something to do with Zen. Benny, you are so full of shit. Are you trying to guilt trip me into going to bed with you, just so I can get you to come to the network affiliate show with me? Kathy, I had hoped that you knew me better than that. If you can remember back to just last night, while I was trying my hardest to get myself some much-needed sleep, you were all pressed up against me, trying to rub your body all over me in the bed, but I was able to resist and just pushed you away from me. I almost couldn't get you to quit trying to do things until I finally threatened to kick you out of bed if you didn't leave me alone. Liar. Liar. Kathy was laughing and pushing me as she spoke. You must lead a rich fantasy life to come up with that story. But really, Benny, how long has it been since you've been late? You can tell me. I won't laugh. Much. Probably longer than it's been for you. You might be surprised, Benny. Maybe even shocked. I turned away from her, having had enough of that particular topic, and went over to the cards she brought with the gifts and took my sweet time filling them out. I've always liked to include a personal message with gift cards, trying to make it seem less mundane and trivializing. I wrote my parents that, in spite of my so far dismal track record, I still had hopes of one day celebrating my 30th anniversary with the right woman. I wished Mike and Tammy a lifetime of feeling the same way about each other as they did right now. By the time I was finished, it was after 3 o'clock, and I told Kathy to get ready to go because I wanted to stop off somewhere and get something to eat before we went to the shindig at her work. That produced a quick flurry of activity on her part, and after only 45 minutes, she was all dolled up and ready to leave. I went in and put on my best and most conservative suit. I still manage at special occasions to clean up pretty well. I'm a little over 6 feet tall and weigh in at about 180, with short dark brown hair and good teeth and clear complexion. I'm not what I'd call handsome, but I'm not homely either. Kathy is better looking than me by several orders of magnitude. She is 5'7" and weighs about 115. She has ash blonde hair that is just past shoulder length and is curly at the ends. She is exceptionally delicate featured in her face, with full, pouty lips and beautiful blue eyes. She has a very deep dimple on her left cheek and has a cute, Nicole Kidman type of nose. Her body is really fine as well. I've always contended that Kathy's but was far and away her most glorious asset. She disagreed, but graciously accepted my right to have a dissenting opinion. We left my apartment at 4 o'clock and drove off in my Lexus, a company car that was already showing the wear of over 40,000 miles. Kathy seemed genuinely disappointed when she learned I had sold my 1970 Dodge Charger. I'd bought it in high school and spent countless hours restoring it to better-than-new condition. The car had a sleek black paint job, and under the hood was a powerful Hemi V8 engine that I had meticulously tuned. I drove that Charger through college and up until last year, when I finally sold it to a collector. The money I got was enough to clear out my remaining student loans. The car had been sitting in my dad's garage most of the time, and I knew it deserved to be driven and appreciated, not left to gather dust. I took Kathy to this little dive that we used to go to a lot when we were together. They served these huge pastrami sandwiches that literally melted in your mouth. $10 for a great pastrami sandwich with 3/4 of a pound of pastrami on it is a pretty good bargain. Why did you pick this place of all places to bring me, Benny? Are you trying to be mean? What? I thought you loved this place. Well, I guess I do, but not just for the sandwiches. The chili fries? A-hole. I don't understand. I really thought you'd like to come here. We used to come here a lot. And what else? I don't know, Kathy. What else? We were sitting right here, in this booth, when you proposed to me. You don't remember? Oh shit, I thought. I'd completely forgotten, but she was absolutely right. How could I forget something like that? She's right. I am an a-hole. Kathy, I'm really sorry. I guess I wasn't thinking when I decided to bring you here. I wasn't deliberately trying to stir up bad feelings for you. I've always thought of this as a happy place for us. I just forgot some of the reasons why it might be considered special to us too. I'm sorry. Did you also forget what day today is, Ben? Nope. It's Saturday, August 13th. And when did we get married? August 14th. But that isn't until tomorrow. So, when did you ask me to marry you? The day before we went to Las Vegas. August 13th. Kathy, I've had a rough week already. I wouldn't remember if it was my own birthday today. Don't read anything sinister into my bringing you here. I remembered that we used to enjoy eating here. I was hungry. Let's finish up here and head over to your affiliates party or show thing. We finished up and drove over to the hotel where the gathering was convening. I was surprised at how Hollywood the presentation ended up being. I even recognized some of the celebrities the network had gathered together for their affiliates bash. They showed about 40 short clips of programs, specials, and old TV series that they would be running over the next year, and talked about advertising revenues, market share, and audience demographics, just as if religious programming was a regular business. Kathy introduced me to about 10 people, holding onto my arm and having the two of us act like your average married couple. One of Kathy's bosses confided in me that the network had big plans in the future for our little Kathy. At about 8:30, the affiliates thing broke up, and Kathy led me over to a banquet room that was assigned for the after-show dinner thing. There was the usual undercooked chicken and overcooked vegetables, and I found myself at a loss for trying to make intelligent conversation about CBN to any of my seating partners. Kathy, though, appeared to be right in her element. She could rattle off jargon right up there with all the other producers and executives. I felt like a housewife brought to her first power luncheon. After the dinner was over, some heavy, rosy-cheeked, older gentleman got up and thanked everyone for their hard work in putting tonight's show together. He made it a point to single out several individuals for their outstanding contributions. I found myself a little resentful when Kathy's name wasn't mentioned, even though I had no idea whether she'd had anything to do with the event planning. By 10:30, it was obvious that everyone would soon be leaving. I was happy when Kathy motioned me over so that the two of us could join the line of departing guests. We were just about to make it safely out the door of that banquet room when the rosy-cheeked big boss headed right at us. "Kathy, just a minute if you will. I really didn't get a chance to meet your husband." I felt the tightness of her grip on my arm, increasing as the man was talking. I stuck out my hand in greeting. "Ben Smith, a pleasure to meet you." What followed was 10 fairly intense minutes of question and answer. Was I okay with the prospect of Kathy's moving up to greater responsibility? How about the many extra hours she'd be working, etc.? Were we making any immediate plans to start a family? Would Kathy's traveling be a problem to me? I answered each question, putting a proud smile on my face and assuring the boss that I was as happy as could be to see Kathy succeeding while doing something she loved. By the time it all ended, Kathy's arm had relaxed again, and the smile on her face might actually have been genuine. We finally excused ourselves, shaking hands all around, and made it out to the valet parking. "Benny, I can't begin to thank you enough for doing this for me. I really appreciate it, and I owe you a big one." "You're very welcome, Kathy. I hope it went well enough that your promotion sails right through. You deserve it, and if those people I spoke with tonight are to be believed, that promotion is deserved and already overdue. I don't think you owe me anything. I think we're about even. I do feel bad about ruining your chances to get laid tonight. I remember how much you always enjoyed doing that. Don't worry about it. Another week isn't going to kill me. You never said how long it's been for you? A month? 6 weeks? I don't really try to keep track of those kind of things. Kathy, let's just say it's been a while and leave it at that." It took us about half an hour to get back to my place, and we were mostly quiet during the ride. After I parked, I told her that she didn't have to come up, that she'd already done more than enough to make up for the time she'd needed my help. She reminded me that her suitcase was up in the apartment, and that she'd made me a deal to help me with things until I left on Monday morning. I smiled and followed behind her into my building. I noticed that she hadn't lost anything in the time we'd been apart. I reminded myself she was a whole person, not just her striking figure. For a moment, I managed to focus on that, until I noticed the subtle sway of her curve as she climbed the stairs. So much for that. So, sue me. Once we got into my apartment, I told Kathy she could stay up if she wanted to, but I was ready to hit the sack. I undressed, hung up my suit, and went in to brush my teeth, floss and rinse, and take a leak before going to bed. I lay on my side of the bed, waiting to see if she was coming to bed, or if she'd wait until she thought I was sleeping. She came in the bedroom within 2 minutes of me getting in bed. I took that as a positive sign. I heard her in the bathroom, and then felt the bed move a little as she crawled in on the other side. I didn't move, not a twitch, although my mind was certainly operating at full speed, processing a lot of improbable scenarios about what might be about to take place. "Good night, Benny. Thanks again for tonight." "Night, Kathy. I'm glad it worked out for you." "Benny, do you think you'd mind too much if I went with you to say hello to your mom and dad tomorrow? I always liked the two of them, and we split up so suddenly that I never had a chance to tell them goodbye. It might be pretty awkward for me, Kathy. They've only recently gotten over being mad at me for letting you get away. I wouldn't want to get them started up again. I could explain to them about how it wasn't your fault. Did you tell them what we were fighting about that night?" "Kathy, I'm pretty tired right now. Maybe we'll talk in the morning? I don't want you taking this the wrong way, but if you let me go with you tomorrow, I'll make sure you get laid all you want tonight. It could be like a better ending for us than the last one. If you want to, I mean. I really don't think so, Kathy. No offense, but I don't make bargains for sex. How long has it been, Benny?" It's been a long, long time for me. Me too, Kathy. A long time. Let's go to sleep now. Okay? Okay, Benny. Good night. I'm sorry I hit you. I love you. I felt her hand on my back. I'd never wanted to turn around and hold her as much as I did at that moment, but I resisted it with every ounce of willpower I possessed. I felt her hand pull away from me and could feel the mattress move as she turned her back to me. I lay on my side, cursing my cowardice, wishing I could lay the past to rest. I didn't sleep well at all. Every time I'd drift off to sleep, some new thought would explode in my mind and bring me instantly awake. I got out of bed at 6 o'clock the next morning, feeling like shit, more tired than when I'd first lain down. I went out in the kitchen and warmed up the coffee left over from the day before. Even warmed over, it was superior to what I could brew. I was taking a first sip when Kathy walked out of my bedroom. She saw what I was drinking and went to work brewing a fresh pot. Did you mean it when you said we'd talk this morning, Benny? Jesus, didn't she know when to quit? She had to be able to see that I didn't want to go through any of this with her. Kathy, it's over with us. Nothing has changed that would make any difference. You're sorry you slapped me. I'm sorry for bringing up your past and for making accusations. It shouldn't matter so much to me that you went to see that guy, but it does, and it always will. In my world, married women don't meet old lovers behind their husbands' backs, period. No exceptions. In your world, it's okay as long as they don't jump in bed. I can understand your point of view, Kathy. I just don't happen to share it. I shouldn't have called you those names either, and I'm sorry for doing it. Okay, it's over. Apparently, it only takes one person to end a marriage. Why won't you let it end for us better than it did? If you leave now, Kathy, it's a better ending. You helped me and I helped you. Isn't that better? You don't mean better, you mean happier, right? I don't have a happy ending in me. I wish I did. I wanted one last night, but I couldn't reach out and take it when it was offered, could I? If I could take it back, I would. He meant less than nothing to me, a guy I'd slept with a few times, right before I met you. I agreed to meet him only to tell him how you and I had gotten together so suddenly, how I never had a chance to tell him I'd met somebody important to me because we were always together after we met. It was a courtesy meeting, not some sordid meeting and betrayal with my old lover. It was more like, hello, I found my perfect match. I'm married and deliriously happy. Have a nice life. We're rehashing the same old argument here. I understand what you were telling me. I even believe it. It makes no difference to me that your intent was innocent in meeting with him. You arranged to meet with him, and then you hid that meeting from me. When I was told that there had been a meeting and asked you whether it had taken place, you denied it. I've thought 1,000 times that I shouldn't have brought the subject up when we were having a different argument. It wasn't fair to spring it on you when I did. Unfair or not, you chose to lie to me and deny the meeting had taken place. You claim you panicked. I claim you deliberately deceived me. Well, Benny, it seems like you win again. I have no counter to your argument. You're right. I lied to you, and I deceived you. If you loved me even a tiny fraction of how much I love you, you'd forgive me and give us another chance. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all to get you to forgive me and give me another chance? If there is, just tell me and I'll do it. Anything? She was crying, and so was I. We both knew what my answer would be even before my lips started moving. I hated myself as I said it, but I said it anyway. No, Kathy, there's nothing, sorry. She got up, picked her stuff, and left crying. I got up, closed the door, and made myself a hard one and started the music. The night ended under the circumstances that I might have not thought about, but I was glad it ended. Just to add, we never met again and life just went on. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
We had been married for 15 years, but things had become monotonous and we grew apart. We were living under the same roof, but in separate worlds, different rooms, no longer partners, confidants, or lovers. She started leaving hints, and I finally took notice. I did some digging, and it turned out she had an affair, at least an emotional one. She had been complaining to me, but I had stopped listening to her long ago, dismissing her complaints and mockeries. But when I uncovered the truth, I stopped just hearing her. I really listened. She was unhappy with our marriage, and she had fallen out of love with me. I knew if I tried to convince her that she was wrong and that we could fix our marriage, she'd only distance herself even more. I could see it in her eyes. The gap between us was growing wider. So, I decided to let go of the idea of fixing things. I sat there, drinking my beer, replaying our last argument over and over in my mind, trying to figure out how to win her back. But every time I tried harder to get her back, she drifted further away. I spent late nights in the guest room, letting my wife sleep in our large family bed while I nursed my wounds. One night, something changed. As I reflected on our relationship, I had a sudden realization. Why was I arguing with her about her feelings? What she felt was real to her, and I had been dismissing it. I realized how foolish I had been, trying to tell her that her feelings weren't valid. From that moment on, I stopped arguing with her. But what about me? As I sat there in the dark, it hit me. I wasn't happy either. I wasn't in love with her anymore. I was in love with the idea of our marriage and the life we used to have, but that wasn't our reality anymore. This epiphany shook me, and I knew I had to make a change. I spent time reflecting, and eventually, I came up with a plan. It didn't matter if it worked or not. I knew that what we were doing wasn't working, and I couldn't keep doing the same thing expecting different results. So, I smiled, tossed the empty beer bottles into the trash, and made the decision to sleep in the guest room. This was part of the plan. But just as I was about to settle in, my wife, Becky, opened the door and flicked on the light, interrupting my peace. "Why are you sleeping in the guest room?" Becky asked as she walked into the room. I squinted against the bright light, my eyes adjusting. "I stayed up late and didn't want to disturb you," I replied. She looked at me for a moment before heading to the kitchen to make herself coffee. I wasn't a coffee drinker. Thankfully, I could wake up alert and ready to go. After jumping into the shower, I prepared for the conversation ahead, feeling oddly light on my feet. When I walked into the living room, Becky was sitting across from me, visibly agitated, her fists clenched. I sat down on the couch in my usual spot, watching her closely. "Timothy," she began, her voice shaky, "this isn't working. I feel disappointed, lost, and I don't think I love you anymore." I sat still, letting her words hang in the air. She took a deep breath and continued, "I know we've been together a long time, but I think we need to get a divorce." The word divorce lingered, and I couldn't help but smile as she nervously waited for my reaction. "That sounds good, dear," I said casually. She blinked in disbelief. "Timothy, did you hear me?" I nodded. "Yes, I heard you. You feel it's not working, you don't love me, and you want a divorce." "I agree." She seemed bewildered, her confusion evident as she searched my face for a reaction. "Do you understand now?" she asked. I stood up, walked over to her, and knelt down in front of her. "Becky, I can't change how you feel. If you don't love me, how can I argue with that? Can I tell you that you're wrong about your feelings? No. If you feel you can't live with me anymore, then how can I argue with that either?" Becky looked at me as if I had lost my mind. But in that moment, I saw the recognition in her eyes, an acknowledgement that I understood what she was feeling, and she appreciated it. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking. "You said you didn't love me?" I nodded. "There were times just like for you." She looked taken aback, as if this wasn't the scene she had imagined playing out. Her emotions were reflected in her expression, and I couldn't help but notice the shift. "Anything else?" I asked. "I need to leave tonight, so I'd like to settle this now, if you don't mind." "Are you leaving right now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I stood up, putting on my jacket. "Yes, I'm leaving. I think I'll hit a few bars. Maybe I'll start looking for someone else instead of you." I waved goodbye to her and left, leaving her sitting in the chair, stunned and speechless. I stopped at the nearest bar, ordered a bourbon, and took a seat at a table away from the crowd. As I sipped my drink, I took out my phone and called Nancy, a coworker who was known as the office gossip. I played the part of the abandoned husband, telling her about the conversation I'd had with Becky, especially her shocking request for a divorce. I didn't tell her the full truth, of course. I was at the bar, drowning my sorrows in whiskey, and I might not show up for work the next day. I could hear the gears turning in Nancy's head. She and I had flirted a bit at work, and she was single. Before long, she invited herself out to join me, claiming she wanted to keep me company during this emotional time. I agreed and met her at a bar I knew my wife and her friends often visited. Was I concerned that someone might see me? No. My marriage was over, and neither Becky nor I had love left for each other. Nancy showed up quickly, dressed to impress, maybe hoping to get to me before anyone else could. That's what I like to believe, at least. But when she saw me, she was surprised to find my body language and mood didn't match the gravity of the news I'd shared with her. My smile didn't help either. "Timothy, what's happening?" she asked, sitting beside me, confused. I raised my hand and pointed to my ring finger, which was now bare. "She wants a divorce. That's how she feels. Why should I fight it?" I waved down the waiter and ordered another drink. Nancy ordered her usual Cosmo as she sat down. "Timothy, over the phone, you seemed more upset," she said. I took a deep breath. "We've been unhappy for a while," I replied. "I finally realized that maybe I don't love her like I used to." She wants this divorce, so I'm not going to fight it. If she wants to leave, fine. I'm not going to lie around feeling forgotten and unloved. Nancy took a big sip of her drink and set it down, watching me. I could tell my attitude was having an effect on her, though I wasn't sure if it was confusion or something else. Maybe we should dance? I said without waiting for her to answer, grabbing her hand and leading her to the dance floor. She looked up at me. Timothy, what are you planning to do? I pulled her closer, enjoying the closeness. I'm going to give her everything she thinks she wants. I'm going to do whatever I want right now. And right now, I want to dance with you. In fact, I've wanted to dance with you for a long time. She smiled, looking into my eyes. If you're trying to get back at her. I raised an eyebrow. Maybe, I replied, as she pressed her body against mine, comfortable and warm. I'm okay with that, she said with a sigh, and we lost track of time. It felt good not to worry about calling home to tell Becky when I'd be back. Nancy was fun, intelligent, and we flirted all evening. She was completely mine, and she knew it. I knew it, but I didn't take her home with me. It was enough to know that someone wanted me. Becky had bruised my ego, but Nancy had built it back up. In fact, I'd say Nancy was more attractive than Becky. We kissed in the parking lot by her car. I opened the door for her and smiled. See you tomorrow at work. She nodded, understanding that I wasn't looking for anything serious right now. I made it clear that I just needed some fun, and that's all I was offering. Nancy understood that. By the end of tomorrow, I was sure all the women in the office would know about it. I'd like to tell you that I'm a calm man, but the truth is, I was already looking forward to rubbing this in Becky's face a little. When I walked in the door, Becky was already in bed. As soon as she heard me come in, she jumped up to meet me. Where have you been? She snapped. I hung up my coat in the closet and started undressing. I went out, I said. I told you I was leaving. Why should you care? Timothy, I was worried you might do something bad to yourself. I smiled. Becky, I know how you feel. I'm fine. You want a divorce? I'll gladly give you one. I'm not going to force you to live with someone you don't love anymore. I grabbed my pillow and my clothes for the next morning, heading for the guest room. Timothy, Becky called out, her voice hesitant. I stopped, shifting my things to the other hand. What? I asked. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I don't understand. You don't have to sleep in another bed. I paused, deliberately not making it easy for her. Are you suggesting that I move out of our bedroom? Becky gasped, wiping away a tear. No, I didn't mean that. I mean, you can share the bed with me, if you want to. If you don't want to, I guess I could move to another room. Her voice was shaky, unsure. She seemed nervous about the idea of me actually leaving the bedroom. I could see the fear in her face, unsure of what I might do next. I decided to spare her the agony. Well, this bed is more comfortable. I'll stay here with you, if it's not too much trouble. Her face brightened. Oh yes, that would be wonderful. I mean, it's no problem for me. Then it's settled, I said, tossing my pillow back onto the bed. She opened her mouth, probably to talk, but I was too tired. Let's just go to bed, I told her. By the following evening, for women at work had shown interest in me. One of my friends even gave me his sister's number. She was a widow, struggling to find someone. I set up dates for the coming week with all 4 women, including another one with Nancy. I intentionally kept this evening free because I needed to talk with Becky and sort things out. It was time to address the situation. When I got home, Becky was waiting for me. Carol saw you last night at the bar, she said. She said you were with a woman. Who was that? What were you doing together? She said you two looked really comfortable. I could have exploded. I could have yelled at her, accused her of neglecting me, of distancing herself from me. But I didn't. I smiled and told her I'd answer her questions after I changed. She tried to push, but I ignored her and wanted to change into something more comfortable. When I came back downstairs, Becky was staring at me, her eyes filled with anger and tears. She was ready for a fight. It was Nancy from work, I said, not denying it. She probably expected me to make excuses, but I didn't. What were you doing together? She asked, her voice full of accusation. We were on a date, I replied calmly. On a date? She shrieked, and I nodded. Yes. You want a divorce, right? You told me you don't love me. So why shouldn't I look for love elsewhere? You don't love me anymore, so what reason do I have to stay here? She slumped into her chair, defeated. But what will people say? She asked, her voice quieter now. Carol's already gossiping about you dating some woman. I stood up, pacing. Don't you dare call Nancy a woman like that, I said. She's a lady, and I treated her as such. Last night, she went on a date with a married man. but I guess that's what you call a promiscuous woman. So what would you call a married woman who knowingly dates other men without her husband's knowledge? Becky was silent, her face a mix of panic and realization. What does that have to do with me? She exploded. I remained calm, my silence stretching between us. She finally saw it in my face. How much do you know? She asked, her voice trembling. Enough, I said sharply. Whether you slept with them or not, I really don't care anymore. This marriage was over the moment you checked out. I'm done. I'm moving on. I'm taking care of myself because I don't get any support from my wife at home. I went into the kitchen and made myself dinner. When I finished, I found Becky watching me. She hesitated for a moment before saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry too, I said, putting away the dishes. I've got plans for the rest of the week. Don't expect me home early. And if you prefer, I can sleep in the guest room. She didn't respond. Later, I went to bed in the guest room, leaving Becky to deal with her restless night. The next day, I met Kathy. She was a sweet, 35-year-old blonde, divorced with 2 kids. We had coffee and then did something silly, played laser tag, just the 2 of us against a team of 10 teenagers. They kept annihilating us, but we laughed, sitting and chatting between games. After one round, we both died in the game and lay side by side. I pulled her towards me and kissed her. She kissed me back, and after a nice dinner, I walked her back to her house. We kissed again before parting ways, and she made me promise to ask her out again soon. When I got home, I expected another confrontation with Becky, but when I walked in, she seemed different, subdued. Hello, she said quietly. I smiled and greeted her as I undressed after my date. You seem like you had a good time, she observed, trying to hide her emotions. I did, thanks for noticing, I replied. How was your evening? She asked. We talked for the first time in months, really listened to each other. She finally confessed, I've never slept with anyone else. I've kissed a few men, and I shared my feelings with Justin at work. He wanted more, but I wasn't ready. I looked at her and said, Becky, I'm sure we both share blame in this. Even though you didn't sleep with anyone, you still betrayed me. We were a team, and you checked out long ago. I respect that you didn't actually sleep with someone before asking for a divorce, but you've still hurt me. I should have listened to your feelings instead of arguing with them. She nodded, her face a mixture of regret and acceptance. We sat in silence for a while, both processing everything. Timothy, I'm feeling so confused right now. I'm not sure if I want a divorce. I smiled and replied, let me know when you figure it out. I'm not kicking you out, and I'm not planning to leave anytime soon. I was already heading to the guest bedroom when she asked, Are you still going to see Nancy? Yes, I answered. I'm seeing her, and others too. Do what you need to do, figure it out. I need to do what's best for me. If we get a divorce, well, then it wasn't meant to be. I entered the guest bedroom, but she followed me, stopping in the doorway. Timothy, she said. I turned to see her standing there as I took off my shirt. Come back to bed, please, she begged. I hesitated. Do you think that's wise? Tears streamed down her face. I don't know. I just want you right now. I reached out to her, and she threw herself into my arms, sobbing. She was confused and didn't know how to feel. I carried her back to our bed, holding her as we fell asleep. Lauren was a good friend of mine. We often discussed the latest TV shows and fandom topics. We went to a bar with live music that evening, which she was excited about, but none of her friends or dates were interested in joining her. So, I took her with me. We had fun, but there was no romantic chemistry between us, just a solid friendship, which was enough for both of us. I got home early and parked in the driveway, only to see a car there. A brief pang of jealousy flared up, but I quickly calmed myself, reminding myself that whatever happens, happens. There's no point in worrying, right? I learned this technique from my psychiatrist during treatment for my fear of flying. Instead of thinking, oh God, I'm about to get on a plane, he helped me reframe it to, oh God, I'm about to get on a plane, I can't wait. It took some practice, but it generally worked in the short term. I repeated my mantra and opened the door, finding Becky sitting with Carol, one of her friends. Timothy, I didn't expect you back so soon, Becky said. Carol, I nodded at them. Carol gave me a cold stare but didn't speak. Work finished early, so here I am, I said. Do you need some privacy? Becky and Carol exchanged glances, and Carol stood up. I should get going. Becky, I'll talk to you soon. Becky walked Carol to the door, and when she returned, she said, Sorry for intruding. I didn't mean to interrupt your evening. I shrugged. Don't be silly, Timothy. This is your home too. I paused, considering her words. When was the last time either of us called this place our home? Have you eaten? She asked. I poked at the leftovers from what she and Carol had apparently shared. How are you? I asked. She sat down. I'm okay, I think. I invited Carol over to talk, but she only confused me more. How so? I asked. She wanted me to kick you out, change the locks, and divorce you, Becky said. Well, my key still works, so I guess you didn't have time to call the locksmith, I replied. She laughed softly. Don't be silly. I had to explain to her that I was the one who asked for the divorce after I told you that. What rights do I have over you? I left you, right? She looked intently at me, that last part more of a question, searching for an answer. I wanted to jump up and reassure her, to tell her that I still belonged to her, but I didn't. I stayed silent. In the past, my reassurances would have pushed her away, but maybe this more non-committal approach would have a different effect. Changing the subject, I blurted out, I'm afraid I have some bad news. My date for tomorrow night canceled, so now I'm stuck with concert tickets. Maybe you'd like to go with me instead of another girl? Her face brightened. Oh, Timothy, I would love to. I mean, if you want. I shrugged. Well, I could give these tickets to someone at work. No, she said decisively, but then added, I mean, I'd be happy to go with you. She blushed and nodded. Are you sure? I asked. Yes, she whispered. I smiled. This could be fun. I informed Heather about the change in plans, and though she was disappointed, she understood. Such is life in the dating game. Becky was dressed and ready when I picked her up after work. She looked amazing, clearly dressed to impress. I couldn't help but think she might have chosen that outfit to catch my attention. I didn't know much about the band. Heather had recommended the concert, so I'd bought the tickets. They were good, loud but enjoyable. I wasn't surprised when we ran into Heather. I could see that Becky was caught off guard by how great Heather looked, and she quickly realized that Heather was supposed to be my date tonight. I apologized to Heather, introducing her to Becky. Heather, this is Becky. Becky, Heather, I said. Heather was supposed to be my date tonight, but something came up. Usually, when I introduced Becky, I referred to her as my wife, but this time, I decided not to. Becky noticed right away. Nice to meet you, Heather, Becky said, looking her directly in the eyes. Something passed between the two women. Heather, being smart, quickly apologized and said she'd see me at work the next day. Becky, on the other hand, was seething. She grabbed my hand and asked, Timothy, where's your wedding ring? I shrugged. At home. I took it off after you asked for a divorce. I don't need it anymore. Becky was at a loss for words. Timothy, we aren't divorced yet. I smiled, focusing on the music. Several times, I went to the bar to refill our drinks. Each time, Becky kept a close watch on me. Every time I was at the bar, some woman would approach, and I'd chat with them. One even made me laugh and slipped me her number. Becky noticed but didn't say anything. I'm not usually the type to flirt, but after Becky asked for the divorce, I allowed myself to be more free. I discovered I had a rather blunt knack for flirting, and without the restraint I once had, I didn't need to hold back anymore. I'm not the handsomest guy around, but I've always had a good sense of humor, and it seemed that women appreciated it. For the first time in a while, I could feel Becky watching me, maybe even remembering how my humor and charm once captivated her heart. She stayed quiet the whole way home, and so did I. Once we were home and getting ready for bed, Becky asked again, Timothy, where's your wedding ring? I pointed to the sock drawer in the dresser. She walked over, opened it, and pulled out the gold ring. She stared at it for a moment, then looked at me, her eyes welling with tears. It's yours now, I told her. I think you should throw it away or sell it. She hesitated. What should I do with it? She asked quietly. Do whatever you want, I replied. That ring was a symbol of our love, our marriage. At one point, it was a shield, a warning that I was unavailable to others. I doubt most people even understand the meaning behind it. For me, this ring kept other women away. I hoped your ring would do the same for you, but ever since you chose not to live with me anymore, I no longer need it to protect me. It just reminds me of what used to be. I looked her straight in the eyes until she met my gaze. When the time comes, you'll decide what to do with it. I stepped closer to her and closed her fingers around the gold band. She held onto it quietly, accepting the responsibility. Thank you for the evening, she called out to me as I was drifting off to sleep. I really enjoyed the concert and spending time with you. Anytime, I muttered, before slipping back into sleep. The next morning, breakfast was ready. Becky had made eggs and bacon, and I appreciated her effort. But as I looked at her, I noticed she hadn't taken off her wedding and engagement rings. I also noticed Becky fidgeting with her wedding and engagement rings as we ate breakfast together that morning. Later, at work, Carol called me. Carol, I'm surprised to hear from you. What can I do for you? Lunch today at 12:30 at Bohemia, she said, before hanging up. I stared at the phone, unsure of what to expect. I didn't know Carol very well. She was one of Becky's friends from work, someone I didn't have much interaction with. Becky had always seemed to bond with her, but Carol had never been particularly friendly toward me. When I walked into the bar where I'd first met Nancy, I saw Carol sitting at a table with a white linen tablecloth. She waved at me, but her expression was tense and stern, signaling that this conversation would likely not be pleasant. As soon as I sat down and our orders were taken, Carol gave me a hard glare. What the hell are you doing? Becky is in agony, and you're dating other women right in front of her? For the first time in a while, I felt my face flush with a mix of embarrassment and anger. I quickly bit my tongue, realizing that anything I said or did here would probably get reported back to Becky. I took a moment to regain control of my emotions before responding. Carol, how much do you really know about what's going on with Becky? I asked. I know her husband is acting like a complete idiot, she growled. I glanced around, aware of the people watching us. Carol, stop talking nonsense. Answer my question honestly, and I'll answer yours. I have nothing to hide. Carol hesitated, then relaxed as the waiter brought our food. I sat back, waiting for her to continue. Becky's situation wasn't lost on Carol. Becky's confused, Carol admitted. So confused that she feels she needs to see other men to sort out her thoughts. She blushed, sipping her water. Becky's having a weak moment, Timothy, she added. Really? I asked, my voice thick with sarcasm. So now I'm the idiot? We've been trying to help her figure things out, Carol said. I leaned in, feeling the anger bubble up. This is where I take exception, Carol. Why is it you and your friends feel the need to help her sort out her marriage? Carol went silent. What business is it of yours? I asked. Becky is my friend, she said quietly. So what? I snapped. Shouldn't I be her best friend, her partner, her life companion? If she had problems, shouldn't she have come to me first? Instead, she goes to you, her friends, who decide it's a good idea to take her places where she can sort out her feelings with other men. Men who don't seem to care they're kissing another man's wife. Carol turned pale. She seemed to lose her appetite completely. I could feel my anger rising. Carol was just another foolish friend who felt the need to meddle in something she didn't understand. Let me ask you something, Carol, I said. Are you married? She shook her head. Have you ever been married? Another shake of her head. Do you have a degree in counseling? She was silent. Then what gives you the right to give advice about marriage? You've never been married. So how would you know what it's like? Carol gasped, taken aback. You think you can meddle in someone else's marriage? I asked. What makes you think you're qualified? I'm her friend, she muttered. From where I'm sitting, you don't know anything about me. How many times have you ever talked to me? Once or twice. I've been married to Becky for 15 years, but when have you ever made the effort to get to know me, to understand the man who's been her partner for all that time? You talk about helping her, but what the hell do you know about me other than what Becky's told you from her perspective? I could tell that Carol was on the verge of tears. I had made my point, and now I needed to get the message through to Becky via Carol. Carol, I said, my voice steady, Becky told me how she feels. She wants a divorce. She said, and I quote, I don't love you anymore. So, tell me, how am I supposed to respond to that? What argument can I make to convince her otherwise? She wants the divorce, and why should I be unhappy, hoping she'll change her mind? I finished my drink and noticed I hadn't eaten much of my food. I stood up, giving Carol one last look. I've realized that other women see something in me that Becky no longer does. She pushed me away. I didn't push her away. I'm not going to put my life on hold just because my partner is confused and no longer wants me. I'm trying to move on. How she feels about that is her business. I'm no longer trying to convince her or tell her how she should feel. I've accepted that. With those final words, I left before Carol could say anything more. I knew as soon as I walked out, she'd be on the phone with Becky. As I walked away, I had some thinking to do. That evening, I was meeting Sandra. Things went very well with Sandra. She was different from the others. She was a younger, very beautiful black woman, incredibly attractive. When she first joined our company, we were formal and polite. But a few months in, there was a moment when I was telling a rather spicy joke to some guys, and as I reached the punchline, Sandra walked into the room behind me. The men around me noticed her and held their breath. I turned to see her shocked expression and flashed her a mischievous smile. Admit it, that's really funny, I said. She stood there for a moment, her face saying, I can't believe this white guy just said that to me, before she burst out laughing along with me. From then on, she was one of the guys. By the end of our date, however, she was all woman. Sandra allowed me to go further than I had with other women, but when the moment came, I was the one to decline her offer to stay the night. As much as I wanted to, there were still issues with Becky that I needed to resolve before I could sleep with someone else. That night, as I settled into bed, Becky spoke up. "Timothy?" "Yes?" I answered, turning to face her. "Please take a shower." Her voice was trembling. "Why?" "It's dark," I said, confused. The light came on, and I saw her face, flushed and moist from crying. She couldn't meet my eyes. "Please, Timothy. If you don't take a shower, I'm going to have to ask you to sleep in the guest room." I was stunned. "What's happening?" "I can't stand the smell of her on you," she said, turning away from me. "You smell like her." It hit me then that she meant Sandra. I felt horrible. I hadn't even realized. "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling the weight of her pain. "If you want me to go to the guest room, I can." "No," she sobbed. "I want you to come back to our bed, but only after you take a shower. I can't stand her scent on you. It's bad enough knowing you're seeing other women. I can pretend you're just out with the guys. I can ignore the rumors my friends tell me about who they've seen you with. But now, I can smell her on you. I can tell." I walked over to her side of the bed, kissed her forehead gently, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I was inconsiderate. Let me take a shower, and I'll come back to our bed." The next morning was Saturday, and I slept in. It had been a long week, going out every night, trying to juggle everything. I could feel my age, and I just hoped I wouldn't catch a cold or something. Becky woke me up with breakfast, and then asked me about my plans for the weekend. "I don't have anything planned," I told her, still sitting at the kitchen table. "Timothy," she said, her voice quiet. She reached into her pocket and pulled something out, then knelt down in front of me. She opened her hand, and I saw my wedding ring. Taking my hand, she looked up at me. "I want to work on our marriage. I think maybe I didn't think everything through," she said, carefully sliding the ring onto my finger. I didn't stop her. "I still love you," she whispered, staying kneeling as she waited for me to say something. Finally, I spoke. "Do you really feel that way?" I asked. She nodded, her eyes full of sincerity. "No divorce," she said, her voice firm. "What about other men?" I asked, unsure where this was going. "There's no one else but you," she answered, looking at me. "And then, the delicate part. You need to understand," I said. "I'll still occasionally see other women." Becky swallowed, and we sat there for a long time, our eyes meeting in silence. In that moment, I realized something about my wife. I was confident in how this would end. Finally, she nodded. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised," she said softly. "I think I'm in love with you too." I grabbed her and kissed her, passionately. She kissed me back with equal fervor. It turned out that Becky had low self-esteem, something I hadn't fully recognized until now. Over the years, I had treated her well in some ways, but not enough. We had drifted apart, and my biggest mistake was not acknowledging her feelings. Every time she shared something with me, I argued. "Do you know how harmful that is? How arrogant it is to tell someone that their feelings aren't true." It built resentment and hostility over time, and eventually, she no longer valued what we had. Maybe that was my fault. Over time, we changed. Well, she changed. I didn't. Why would I want to go back to how things were? I guess she wanted me to, but we both knew we had changed. She understood now that if she chose to walk away, there were others ready to take her place. "Do you really have to see other people?" she asked, her voice small. "I'm not planning to see other men," I replied, giving her a reassuring smile. "Yes, I will see others from time to time. You may be my wife, but remember, I'm your husband. I won't forget about you." She smiled and then said, "Take me to bed and show me what I've been missing. Show me what all these other women get from you. Do you think you have what I need?" I teased. "I'll just show you my love," she said with a playful smile, "and maybe wear you out so much that you won't have energy for any other woman." I picked her up and carried her to the bedroom. We wasted no time, undressing each other with urgency, almost frantic with desire. Our passion exploded as I took her, and then she took me, and then she took me again. At some point, she realized from my stamina that I hadn't slept with any of the other women. After 15 years of marriage, she knew exactly what I could do in bed. For the rest of the day, she had a knowing smile, but I remained silent. What happened with my dates was something I didn't bring up, and neither did she. It was an episode in our lives best left in the past. From then on, I never asked her about the men she had kissed or spoken to. She now looked at me with a newfound reverence and respect. I never would have believed my plan would work, but in the end, it did, though not in the way I expected. It wasn't a perfect plan, and at first, I was just too stubborn to let her have the satisfaction of seeing her hurtful words destroy me. When I saw how she reacted to my seeing other women while she stayed at home, I pushed my plan further. I won her back by creating space between us. You want what you don't have, and you take for granted what you do have, are the words I now live by. By freeing both her and myself, we've become closer than we ever were before. As for seeing others, I haven't had to yet. The first sign that Becky is reverting to her old self will prompt my next date. I know this, and she knows this. Together, we're working to not just listen to each other, but to truly hear each other. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
It's been a long time since that incident, and I haven't really shared it with anyone in my life now. Tonight, with a good bottle of wine in hand, I feel like letting my fingers do the talking. Back then, I thought I had found the perfect woman. We met during our last year of college at a party, and there was an instant connection. She was a stunning blonde with a beautiful tan. Someone who could easily have been a model, like Kate Upton. She had all these incredible qualities: kind, compassionate, a great listener, and had an active social life with lots of friends. Our friend groups meshed effortlessly over the 3 years we knew each other, and some of our friends even ended up dating. Those were some of the best times of my life. At the time, I was pursuing a post-grad degree in finance while she had a degree in contractual law. We both ended up succeeding in our respective fields, but let me tell you, I wasn't too shabby in the looks department either. I'm 5 feet 11 inches and weighed about 190 pounds. I enjoyed going to the gym and staying fit. I may not have been a super athlete, but I had a solid physique. Still, despite my appearance, I was always pretty shy and hadn't been in many relationships before meeting her. We were completely smitten from the very first time we met. We spent the entire night talking, and from then on, we couldn't get enough of each other. We started texting, calling every day, and going on weekly dates. About a year later, after I landed my new job, she moved in with me. Her family was amazing, and I especially got along well with her mother, although her father was a bit distant with everyone. It was a whirlwind romance, filled with incredible overseas vacations, hiking trips, and luxurious getaways. After 2.5 wonderful years, I decided to propose to her, and she said yes. I was on cloud 9. She took the reins with all the wedding planning, and we began dreaming about our future together. Buying a house, having kids, going on unforgettable family vacations. We were excited about all the amazing things ahead of us. And then, it happened one evening. When we both got home to our apartment, I immediately noticed that she was acting a bit distant. It struck me right away because we had always been very affectionate with each other. At first, this happened maybe once a week for the first month after the proposal, but it started occurring more frequently. I probably wouldn't have thought much of it, except that I had spent a lot of time listening to Reddit stories on YouTube, so I decided to wait and observe. These moments of her pulling away would only last a couple of hours, and then she'd go back to being her usual self. However, after 6 months, with the wedding planned for a year later, her behavior became more frequent, happening almost every night. Our sex life was still great, and my relationship with her parents remained strong. But during Thanksgiving, when we were at her parents' house in Louisville, Kentucky, while we lived just north of D.C., she was distant and standoffish towards me in front of her mother. Her mom, being very observant, noticed this and pulled her aside for a private talk. I could hear them arguing in hushed voices, and after a few intense moments, they rejoined the rest of the family as if nothing had happened. I figured I could ask her about it later, so I did, but she didn't want to talk about it. She asked me to wait until we got home to discuss it. I agreed because I loved her deeply and believed we could work through anything. Her mom looked just like her but older, same stunning appearance, only with a few gray hairs and long, thick blonde hair. This detail becomes important later. When we got home, I brought it up again, but she still didn't want to talk about it. After pushing her for a week, she finally admitted that a guy at her job had been trying to get closer to her. She wanted to be honest, so she showed me her phone. As I looked through it, I noticed that all the texts from the times when she had been distant had been deleted. There was nothing suspicious in the remaining texts, but I did go into her phone settings and turned on the location tracker since we had the same phone plan. Honestly, I thought it would reassure me that she wasn't doing anything wrong. Well, I was mistaken. On the second weekend after Thanksgiving, she had a company Christmas party. I had planned to go with her, but I was hit with food poisoning and had to cancel. Her friend came to pick her up from our apartment that night since they had planned for a wild night out, and the designated driver would take care of everything. I told her to have a great time and that I'd see her in the morning. So, there I was, miserably sick, barely able to leave the toilet for more than 30 minutes. Despite feeling awful, I grabbed my phone to track her location. At first, she was at a restaurant, then at the party venue, and later at a bar. None of this raised any concerns until I saw her phone stop at a downtown hotel. At that point, I felt terrible on multiple levels. Physically, I was projectile vomiting from both ends, and emotionally, I was drained. Exhaustion eventually took over, and I fell asleep around 2 a.m. When I woke up at 7 a.m., I saw that she was still at the hotel. Around noon, she finally came back home, and I was feeling better. She showered me with affection, and I casually brought up the previous night, without mentioning that I knew her whereabouts. She told me about the restaurant, the party, and the bar, but then claimed she went to her friend's place to crash for the night. That was the first lie. Over the next 3 months, she started working later and later, 3 to 4 days a week. When I questioned her about it, she became increasingly defensive. One evening, when my fiancé didn't come home until late, I spoke with her mom. I asked about their Thanksgiving conversation, and she confessed that she suspected her daughter might be cheating based on her body language. Her mom also mentioned that their weekly texts had become more distant and less frequent. With all these thoughts and suspicions swirling in my head, I decided to keep them to myself. 2 weeks later, something changed at work. I was assigned a new project that required me to fly to the Midwest every week from Monday to Friday for the next 5 weeks, starting in 2 weeks. It also came with a salary increase. When I shared the news with my fiancée, she seemed genuinely happy for me. Little did I know, her excitement might not have been for the same reasons as mine. So, I went online and bought 4 motion-activated spy cameras for our apartment. I placed one in the living room entry area, one in the kitchen, one in our bedroom, and one overlooking the hallway. These cameras were small and connected to a hidden internet network, making them undetectable on our regular Wi-Fi. I set up a password to secure them and just waited, keeping a close eye. During my first week away, she had her girlfriends over for 2 nights and never worked late. However, on the 3rd night, a guy came over, and that made me furious. I was sitting in my hotel room, screaming at the screen and hurling every insult I could think of. They went all the way, first on the couch, then in our bed. She contorted herself in ways I didn't even know were possible. The worst part was when I called her while watching them, and she heard her phone ring. She signaled him to pause, answered the call, and when I asked why she was out of breath, she claimed she was at the gym working out. As soon as the call ended, she went right back to it. When I finally returned home on Friday evening, I ignored her and went straight to bed. On Saturday morning, I went cycling, not even realizing how far I was going. I was so upset that I ended up biking over 50 miles from our apartment. My longest ride before that had been just 30 miles, but that day I pushed myself to 105.6 miles. When I finally returned, completely exhausted, I took a shower. Later that evening, she and I went out with our friends, had a good time, and consumed a fair amount of alcohol. Was it considered breaking up when the person you're about to leave has no idea? I was overwhelmed by a storm of heartbreak, anger, rage, and betrayal. It hurt so much because I had loved her deeply. It was hard to believe that someone who had once been so attentive was now completely unaware of what I was going through. Finally, I opened up to one of our mutual friends, and to my shock, he revealed that they had all known about the situation for months. I couldn't believe it. Everyone knew, but nobody said a word to me. That's why our invitations to hang out with them had started dwindling. Looking back, I realized that about 3 months earlier, the invites became fewer and fewer for me. So, I decided to make an effort to win her back. The following weekend, I planned an entire weekend of spoiling her in every possible way. We went out for fancy dinners, indulged in pampering massages, and had heartfelt conversations about our future and my deep love for her. I could tell I was making progress when, after her 4th glass of wine, she started to cry. It became clear that the guilt was finally surfacing. I asked her what was bothering her, but every time she tried to speak, she became choked up. I reassured her that if there was something in her past or any conflict on her mind, I was more than willing to listen. If forgiveness was needed, I was ready to forgive and move forward. The only words she managed to say were how much she loved me, which stung deeply, especially since I had 4 separate videos of her and another man being intimate in our apartment during the 8 weeks of my trips to the Midwest. Those trips ended up lasting 10 weeks in total, and over that time, I recorded over 41 hours of footage of her and the man, who I later found out was her coworker. Interestingly, she never had to work late once while I was away. Every weekend, I made a conscious effort to be extra attentive to her, but with each passing week, she became more distant. After witnessing this for 8 weeks, I reached my breaking point and devised a 12-step plan to break free. The first step was to gather evidence of her behavior. The second step was to get her out of the way so I could execute the rest of my plan. I came up with the idea of a 2-week getaway to an all-inclusive resort in Barbados for us. She was thrilled about it, but a week before the trip, I told her I couldn't go and suggested she take a friend instead. I knew it was over when she showed no disappointment at my cancellation. Little did she know, I had already arranged for her coworker to accompany her on the trip. The next step was to terminate our apartment lease, which conveniently expired 3 days into her trip. Since I was the sole signer on the lease, I was in control of that. I also needed to find a job in another town, and luckily, the company I had been helping in the Midwest offered me a position with a slight salary increase. I also found a new place to live in the area I had planned to move to. While she was away, here's what I planned to do. Take her to the airport, then return home to pack all her belongings. On the same Saturday, I'd get a new phone number, change my phone and email, and cancel all my social media accounts. On Monday, I'd completely separate our finances by withdrawing all the money from our joint accounts, closing them, and putting her share in an envelope with her things. I would then arrange for movers to pack up all my belongings and have them shipped out west. Afterward, I would take all her things to her mother's house, which was about 600 miles away. Thankfully, everything she owned fit in the back and bed of my F-250 crew cab. From Tuesday to Saturday, I would give the evidence to her mother and begin my new life. I wanted to ensure I didn't do anything illegal, so I made sure that nothing of hers went missing. Packing up all her belongings neatly was incredibly difficult, and it was the hardest I've ever cried. I'd read countless stories on Reddit about people being promised change after being caught, but it rarely happened. My hope was that she would genuinely confess so we could forgive each other and move forward, but she never did. She came close on 2 occasions, but the secret she was hiding was too difficult for her to reveal. On Tuesday morning, I left our apartment north of D.C. for the last time. It took me 10 hours to reach her mother's house. When I arrived, I was caught off guard by what happened next. I showed up unannounced, hoping to surprise her. Since they lived in a gated community, I had to buzz her house from the front gate. As I drove up, I saw her waiting for me outside. The moment I approached her, I could tell she had been crying. I asked what was wrong, and she hugged me, sobbing. She told me she suspected her husband was cheating on her with a younger, slimmer, and more attractive woman. I was completely stunned, so I just held her for about 10 minutes while her tears soaked my shoulder. Once she composed herself, I asked if we could go inside to talk. We went inside, and I asked where her husband was. She mentioned that he claimed to be going fishing with friends at a remote cabin an hour away, but added that he hated fishing. She shared all the signs she had picked up on, and it seemed like this had been going on for about a year. We did some research and found a credit card charge for a luxurious 5-star hotel just 20 minutes away. A quick phone call confirmed that her husband was indeed there, having a 4-night rendezvous with his mistress. I responded, 2 peas in a pod, and explained that her husband was cheating on her, and my daughter was cheating on me. That's why I came to drop off her belongings and move out. I showed her the evidence I had compiled in a binder, with screen captures of everything. After flipping through the first few pages, she looked at me in disbelief. We embraced and cried for about 30 minutes. Then, she told me to stop crying and suggested we drown our sorrows by drinking 3 bottles of Moscato and fooling around in every room of the house. She grabbed 2 wine glasses and a bottle of Moscato and headed out to their private pool deck. She asked if I was joining her outside or if I was planning to seek revenge. I won't go into too much detail, but for that night and the next 3 days, we were inseparable. We shared a passionate connection, exploring every part of her, and it felt like we reached new heights together at least 25 times during that period. Once those days came to an end, we parted ways with a passionate farewell, and I drove off to my new destination. She kept me updated on everything that happened after. The day my ex-fiancée returned was unforgettable. I had canceled my phone that morning, so when she landed and tried to reach me, it showed that my number was disconnected. She ended up having her lover give her a ride home. He dropped her off and left, and when she arrived at the door, she was greeted by a couple she didn't recognize, new tenants. She was in shock and tried calling me multiple times, but since my phone was no longer active, she couldn't reach me. She ended up staying with some girlfriends, as her coworker, who was married, wasn't able to help her. In her panic, she called her mom, who told her I had come down and delivered all her belongings, including her money, which was now 600 miles away. Her mom didn't mention that she'd spent more time with me in those 3 days than we had in the last 6 months, but she did share that she knew about the affair and that I had moved on, new job, new place, new life, and no longer living near her or our so-called friends. Her mom also told her that she was separating from her father due to infidelity, which seemed to shake her. My ex-fiancée cried for days and took a week off from work, but unfortunately, she sought comfort in the arms of her married lover. Her mom never told her where I was, and I completely severed ties with that chapter of my life. The only remaining connection I had to it was through her mother, and to this day, she has kept our secret. My ex-fiancée was ghosted, big time. The timing of everything that allowed me to leave my ex-fiancée was incredibly fortunate. The lease ending, finding a new job, and my phone plan coming to an end all happened at just the right moment. If any of these events had occurred differently, the outcome could have been much different. Now, after the fact, my ex-fiancée's mother and I stayed in touch for several months. We had both experienced the loss of our relationships and found ourselves seeking a form of revenge against our respective partners. However, neither of our partners ever learned what transpired between us. 7 months after I had settled into my new location, my ex-fiancée's mother came to visit me. I want to clarify, much to the disappointment of many, that we only talked. We both regretted what had happened between us, acknowledging that it was driven by the intensity of the past and the moment. Many intense moments, to be specific. She told me that her daughter knew where I was and was upset that she hadn't revealed my location. She asked if she could tell my ex-fiancé where I was and provide a way for her to contact me, but I requested that she refrain from doing so, as I had moved on to my new life. We had lengthy conversations about the possibility of her reconciling with her husband. She shared that he was deeply remorseful, admitting everything he had done. His confession was overwhelming for her, and she asked how he planned to rebuild her trust. In an effort to be transparent, he provided all his digital passwords and allowed her to see every hurtful action he had taken in their marriage. Though she was filled with anger, she acknowledged his genuine efforts to repair their relationship. She mentioned that forgiveness would take time, but rebuilding trust would take even more. What brought him back to reality was when she confronted him about the affair and showed him evidence of what their daughter had done to me. I should also mention that my ex-fiancée's mother was an extraordinary woman in every way. She made it clear that if he ever strayed again, she would reserve the right to do the same. When he asked her to clarify, she revealed that as soon as she found out about his infidelity, she had a fling with the first eligible man she came across. This revelation devastated him. They both cried a lot and decided to separate temporarily to give each other time to think and determine whether they wanted to fight for their marriage. Eventually, my ex-fiancée's parents sought marriage counseling, and as of May 2020, they are still together. As for my ex-fiancée, she was devastated by what had happened when she finally went to her parents' house to collect her belongings. There, she was confronted with evidence of the affair, which left her feeling humiliated. My ex-fiancée's mother had to remove some inappropriate pictures from the binder to spare her father from seeing them. Regardless, my ex was crushed by the situation. It wasn't until months later that she discovered her mother had my contact information. She begged her mother for it, which caused a significant strain between them. However, her mother warned her that if she tried to find me or contact me, I would release all the evidence publicly on the internet. This insistence from my ex-fiancée to get in touch with me ultimately led her to come see me. She was also upset about the struggles her parents were facing in their marriage. According to her, she was depressed for several months and sought counseling to cope with it. When she returned from her parents' place in Louisville, Kentucky, she ended the affair with her coworker and began looking for a new job. In December 2019, I learned that she had gotten married and now has 2 beautiful twin daughters with a good man. According to her mother, she still lives in the D.C. area and works from home, enjoying her new life. I'm glad she was able to turn things around and find happiness again. I recently decided to get rid of all the incriminating evidence I had on my ex-fiancée because I didn't want to be the type of person who holds someone hostage for the rest of their life. I asked her mother to pass along a message to my ex-fiancée. If I were in her shoes and received such bombshell information, it would have caused me sleepless nights. As for me, I'm content with my current life. Ex-fiancée's mother and I kept in touch every few months at first, but now we only talk once or maybe twice a year, usually just a short message with updates on our lives. The one question that still remains unanswered for me is whether my ex-fiancée and I could have repaired our relationship if her parents were able to repair theirs, but I never gave it a chance. I can only speculate. Our lives have since moved in vastly different directions. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
As I sat pondering the recent events, I couldn't identify any specific signs indicating she was being unfaithful, no matter how hard I tried. The unease I felt stemmed from numerous small details accumulating rather than one glaring issue. There was definitely something going on, yet I couldn't grasp what it was. I was certain of some mischief, but lacked evidence. I was clueless about who, what, or where this was happening, to the point where I questioned my own sanity. Am I reading too much into this situation? Perhaps I'm exaggerating, conjuring various scenarios of her infidelity, but with whom? I couldn't say, yet my gut churned with uncertainty. I sensed, rather than knew, that something was amiss. Perhaps this marked the onset of an affair, possibly a one-time occurrence. The more I dwelled on thoughts and fantasies, the more self-assured I felt. It seemed like I'd been in this mental space for weeks, but how long had it been before I even slightly sensed something was amiss? I took another sip of my JD. The clinking ice signaled a need for a refill. Catching the bartender's eye, he nodded and smoothly exchanged my glass for another double JD on the rocks. He offered a faint smile, seemingly understanding my inner turmoil. He had encountered that expression countless times. His gaze conveyed both support and empathy as he noticed the distress in my eyes. The sweet taste of JD warmed my mouth and throat with each sip. I resolved to calm myself, scanning the bar and observing a few other patrons. It was serene, the murmurs of conversation filling the air with incomprehensible words, amplifying my growing sense of discontent. There was no happiness here. The patrons' faces were devoid of emotion, blending into the crowd without distinction. Everyone seemed plain and unremarkable. The lone woman, appearing to be in her 40s and slightly overdressed for the time and place, perhaps appeared a bit desperate, was being treated to drinks by an older man who seemed hopeful and attentive towards her. He didn't need to try so hard. I figured she already had his number. The other patrons appeared to be simply passing time while the rain outside further dampened the mood, and soon they would each run out of reasons to linger in the comfort of the bar and head home. I still haven't made up my mind about what I'm going to do. So, what's going on? I turned toward the voice. She gazed at me, her eyes peering deep into my soul. Though I thought I opened my mouth to respond, no words came out. She stood in the dimly lit bar, water dripping from her coat as she began to remove it. "What brings you here, Sammy?" "I was worried about you and had a hunch I'd find you here. So here I am." "Do you want to talk?" I looked at her, trying to regain some composure. "Are you concerned about me? Why? What's happening?" I scrutinized her, wondering if she had any hidden motives. Could I trust her? I took a sip of my JD and ordered her a drink and soda, which the bartender served with flair. Smiling at the sight of Sammy, she caught his eye as he served her, flashing one of his charming smiles as his gaze lingered on her ample bosom accentuated by her tight blouse. Sammy waited until the bartender walked away before addressing the situation. There was a mutual sense of uncertainty between us, along with an unspoken power struggle. I mentioned concerns about her recent behavior, indicating that she appeared burdened. I expressed a desire for her to share what was going on. When I looked into her brown eyes, I was reminded of how effortlessly she understood me, like an open book. This understanding between us was something I deeply valued. Despite occasional disagreements, we maintained a transparent and honest relationship. However, there were certain things we didn't explicitly discuss, yet we both understood them. She reassured me, saying she was fine, and that our relationship was in a good place, alleviating my worries. I watched as she processed my words. It was clear she wasn't buying it. My heart sank, and I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered. Sammy took a deliberate sip from her glass, her gaze penetrating into mine once more. Oh, God. This is it, I thought. She set her glass down and interlocked her fingers, leaning slightly forward toward me. I tried to play it cool by asking what she knew and what I was supposedly hiding. She responded by suggesting we drop the act and be genuine with each other. This caught the attention of the bartender, who subtly turned his head to listen in. She then proposed we find a more private booth, as the current setting was too public. As we moved to a secluded booth, I could see disappointment on the bartender's face. Once seated across from each other, the tension was palpable as we prepared for our forthcoming conversation. I mentioned that I had competed in a tournament and asked for her opinion. She saw through my attempt at deception and reminded me that we had known each other for a long time. She urged me to confide in her, mentioning her familiarity with Sammy since she was 17. She noted that Sammy had always been around and had once had a crush on her when she dated Sammy's sister, Claire. Claire was 3 years older, and we began dating when we were both 20. Sammy and I always got along, much to the displeasure of her older sister. They were as different as night and day in many ways, but their personalities clashed often, evidenced by the numerous quarrels between the sisters over the years. 2 years later, Claire and I tied the knot and envisioned what I believed to be an ideal future. We both held respectable jobs and earned enough to lead a comfortable life. My sister-in-law, Sammy, had her share of fun in her late teens and early 20s, and now, at 25, was seeking something more mature. I felt like she had outgrown her wild phase and had become someone any man would be fortunate to know. Claire and I have been married for 5 years. Well, we'll reach 5 in a month when our anniversary arrives. That's if we make it that far, I thought. Sammy is a very attractive woman, and someone I considered a friend, as well as my sister-in-law. Tears welled in my eyes as I gazed at her, searching for words to express how I felt. But still, her words, I know, resounded loud and clear in my mind. She reached across the table, her fingers caressing mine before squeezing them tightly, a gesture of support, and more, as I felt my heart slowly shattering. All right, Steve, if you won't tell me, then I'll say it. She's cheating on you. I'm pretty sure you know this. Of course I know. What are you going to do about it now? My eyes widened at those words, yet I still resisted understanding as I stubbornly tried to rationalize what I knew and what it meant. I didn't want to hear anything anymore. In my mind, if I didn't truly know, then it couldn't have happened, and thus, it couldn't have hurt me. I wouldn't have to deal with it either. Sammy gazed at me, noticing the distant look in my eyes. Was it shock or denial? Steve, I love you dearly, but for goodness sake, wake up. I'm sure it's some kind of misunderstanding or something. I attempted to brush it off and deceive myself further. Suddenly, Sammy's eyes flashed with anger. She reached out and slapped me hard across the face. The bartender halted, wiping the glass he held. Everything all right over there? I raised my hand. Yes, everything's fine here. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat from the slap, and certain Sammy's perfect handprint lingered there. I'm sorry, Steve, but sometimes you drive me crazy. You know how much I care about you, and I can't bear to see you hurt like this. So be wise and courageous. This is happening, and we need to address it. I swallowed, rubbing my cheek, as the seriousness of my situation sank in, the pain from her slap jolting me to reality. All right, I'll start. I'm sure you at least suspect something, but I'll continue anyway. A few weeks back, I was with her when her cell phone rang. She stepped out to answer it, which struck me as odd, considering we're sisters, darn it. What could she be hiding from me? I nodded, bracing myself for the worst. But as I sipped my JD, she continued. I just found it peculiar. So when I had the chance, I checked her phone. She's so trusting. There wasn't even a lock code on it. The call was from a guy in her contacts who introduced himself as Robert. I had no clue about any Robert or Bob, but I decided to keep an eye out for any recurrence. So who's this guy, Robert or Bob? I inquired, trying to recall any mention of this name. I actually found out about him roughly a week later. He's someone she knew years ago, before she even started dating you. Anyway, it seems he reached out to us through some social network or chat site. Looks like they've been messaging each other for a while now. But I had no idea. All I sensed was that there were these little things happening that seemed to fly under the radar. Yeah, I get it. But it all seemed to fit into their interactions. Nothing overt, but it felt like everything was aligning for them. So it's just two friends messaging each other, reminiscing about the old days or something? It seems that way. That's how it began, anyhow. Are you implying something happened? Yes. And you're saying you didn't detect anything suspicious? Just that it felt like circumstances were working against us. Plus, the glaring absence of opportunities for fun. Sammy regarded me with an incredulous expression, as if I were being foolish. What? I returned her gaze. Steve, I care about you deeply, but come on, snap out of it. Reality sank deeper into my foggy mind as her words grew increasingly real. Damn, I thought this was serious. Taking another sip, I mustered my courage. How far do you think it went? Or do you know? Sammy met my gaze. Her eyes gleamed, briefly averting before locking back onto mine. That fleeting glance told me everything I needed to know. When? How? Where? I queried hastily. My mind raced to catch up as anger began to simmer within me. The battle between reason, sensibility, and raw fury had commenced. I know she's seen him at least 3 times in the past 2 weeks. Initially, I wasn't certain, and it was only 2 days ago that I confirmed it had escalated. I was having lunch with a friend who works alongside Claire, and she accidentally let it slip. I didn't react then, and Claire hid it well, so I let it slide. Turns out she met him twice for lunch and at least once for dinner last week. Does this align with what you observed? I studied her, absorbing her revelations. There have been a couple of instances recently where I phoned her office to arrange a lunch meeting, but she wasn't there. Or she had just left. Was that when she met him? Then? Last week she attended a seminar that she insisted on going to. It was announced last minute and scheduled for after work that evening. She returned home late, past midnight, reminiscing about the event. She mentioned it had dragged on, and her team went for a drink at the hotel bar before leaving. I also recall there was no closeness that night, and she took a shower before bed. My thoughts raced. My mind swirled in confusion as I absorbed these painful truths, each one intensifying the agony and twisting the knife lodged firmly in my heart. To hell with all this, I suddenly spat. Sammy glanced at me, her eyes now reflecting concern. Steve, what's your plan? Don't do anything reckless. You don't want to end up in legal trouble because of her. Meeting her gaze, I sensed she had detected the shift in me. My face felt like stone, my heart a solid block of granite. My body braced for what lay ahead, and she could see it. To hell with all this. I refuse to tolerate this under any circumstances. It ends now. She'll pay. He'll pay too. Rage bubbled within me. My muscles tightened, fists clenched. I've never been one for violence. Sure, I've had my fair share of confrontations in my younger days, but I never sought out trouble. Sometimes you simply must confront the truth, which is precisely what I intended to do. It had been a while, but it needed addressing, and fast. Steve, whatever you're thinking, take a moment. Consider your options. Don't act hastily without a plan. Otherwise, things will spiral out of control. You need to strategize and prepare. Otherwise, you'll only end up getting hurt, she cautioned. Her words tempered my rage, penetrating the rational part of my brain and making sense. Strangely enough, it helped me to regain some composure, realizing that my suspicions were indeed valid. At least I wasn't losing my mind. Is she there right now? I glanced at Sammy, noticing tears welling up in her eyes as a solitary tear traced down her delicate face. Yes, she's with him at this moment. That's why I sought you out, she revealed. Rage surged within me, prompting me to pound my fist on the table. Heads turned in the bar, drawing attention. I signaled to the bartender, who responded with a knowing half-smile. How did he know? Do you have any idea where exactly? I inquired, hopeful for some clarity. No clue, but tomorrow I'll meet with my friend again to gather more information. I know he's married with kids, but I'm unsure of his exact whereabouts. I'll do my best to find out. It might help, she responded. I reached for her hand, gripping it tightly, and wiped a tear from her cheek. Thanks, Sammy. I know this is tough for you, but I truly appreciate it. What's your plan? She regarded me with concern. I can't act impulsively, not yet anyway. But I'll put an end to it. When I do, it'll be final with no regrets. They'll both face consequences. For now, I'll safeguard what's mine and gather evidence for my next move. Sammy eyed me anxiously as I finished my JD. Catching the bartender's eye, he poured us another round. As he approached, I sensed Sammy wanting to speak. I motioned to wait until the drinks arrived, then handed the bartender a bill. Keep the change, I said, dismissing him. How long before you confront her? I pondered. I need time to strategize. Tomorrow I'll make some calls and secure my assets. She won't get a cent from me if I have my way. It'll be tough for you to be around her, won't it? Yes, I realize that. But in a way, it's been that way for weeks now. If she hasn't noticed a change yet, she won't notice anything different. Sammy downed her drink in one gulp and rose abruptly. I have to go, Steve. Can we chat again tomorrow? I'll gather all the info I can. She donned her coat, and I stood, assisting her, sensing her proximity. Darn. She resembled her sister so much. Tears welled in her eyes as I kissed her cheek. Head home. I'll manage. I'll ring you up tomorrow. With a smile, she turned away, and I watched her depart into the dark, damp evening. Taking a deep breath, I settled back into my seat, pondering my next move. One thing was clear. They would face consequences, swift, ruthless, and unforgiving. Memories faded after that. Somehow I awoke in my own bed, mouth dry as a desert. My head still spun as I lifted myself from the bed. Rolling over, I noticed I was alone, with Claire nowhere in sight. My senses gradually returned as I heard a noise downstairs. I swung my legs off the bed and attempted to rise. Oh my God, what did I do to myself last night? I pondered. Staggering to the bathroom, I began to shake off the effects of my JD haze. Descending the stairs, pain enveloped me and my joints protested. Everything throbbed. Peering into the kitchen, I spotted her. "Hello, my love. What happened to you last night? Do you want to hear about it?" I cursed inwardly. "Just had a drink with an old friend. Got carried away. That's all." I seated myself, poured some orange juice, downed it, and poured another. "Really? Who was it? Someone I know?" My mind raced. "No, I don't think so. It was Bob. Haven't seen him in ages. He was in town on business." "Bob." A flicker of recognition crossed her face when she turned around. "Yeah, probably. I mentioned him once. We were in college together, played football. He still asked about you." Claire seemed puzzled. "Sorry, don't recall any Bob, but as long as you had fun, right?" Seized the moment. She took a seat across from me. Recalling my conversation with Sammy, I looked her in the eye. "So, honey, what did you do last night? Anything interesting? When did you get back?" She met my gaze, lying effortlessly. "Oh, nothing much. Finished work, grabbed a bite and drinks. Home by 9:30. Started to worry about you, but remembered your late meeting." I knew she hadn't returned home by then because I was still there at 10 p.m. That's when I reached my limit and headed to the bar. Second strike. "I've got some things to take care of this morning, so I'll shower and hit the road. I might be late tonight, so don't wait up. Bob mentioned he'd be in touch. We've got catching up to do. If he stays a few days, you'll have to invite him over. It's nice reconnecting with old friends." "I'll make sure to do that. You must have some fond memories of him." She gazed at me with a blank expression, trying to conceal any reaction. But there was something there. I could sense it. "Maybe it'll come back to me later." "Love. Now hurry, or you'll be late. Want me to drive? You had a bit too much to drink last night." "No, I'm fine. I'll grab a taxi to pick up my car." "Thanks, though." After downing more orange juice and a couple of painkillers, I got dressed and left the house 30 minutes later while Claire was still getting ready. I had a hectic day ahead. One thing was certain, this wouldn't drag on. I gritted my teeth at the thought of Claire with Bob. My fists clenched. He'd pay, and I'd crush him. Work was chaos. Call after call to resolve line issues. My secretary handled some, but I had to attend meetings. By mid-morning, the rush eased, and I had a bit of downtime to address personal matters. Closing my office door, I delved into my finances. Within 15 minutes, I had cinched up my wallet strings and relocated some cash out of easy reach. Additionally, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer to explore the option of divorce. With a few days still ahead, I figured it would afford me time to gather further intel. While it might not carry substantial weight, it could provide some leverage. Claire maintained her own bank account and credit card, so no action was necessary there. The issue lay in accessing our joint account. Yet, I swiftly closed that avenue, ensuring she couldn't access more than what remained. My personal account was safeguarded with only a nominal balance, the rest securely withdrawn. Given our childless status, any split would likely be straightforward. I privately resolved that reconciliation rested solely on Claire's confession and plea for forgiveness. Any reluctance would spell the end for us. This realization weighed heavily on me as I sat pensively at my desk, reflecting on the day's events and decisions. Did I require further insight into Bob's character and additional evidence? Or was my knowledge alone sufficient to confront them both? Interrupting my contemplation, the phone rang. "Hello? It's me, Sammy. How are you, Steve?" "Oh, caught up with things, thoughts, plans, sorting through it all. Interestingly, I've made some headway. Got more intel on this guy from a friend. His name's Bob Stones, and he's married. I've also got his address and workplace. I obtained this information discreetly. A friend who knows Claire recently spotted her with him. According to her, they're getting quite cozy. She insists that despite their efforts to conceal it, the signs are evident." "Has she witnessed them together?" I inquired. "Yes. They were at the Ramada the other evening after the seminar. They lingered after everyone else had left. She mentioned they seemed at ease with each other. Well, it's a starting point. I'm certain there are CCTV cameras there if necessary. Anyway, please provide me with his details. I need to unravel this. It's gnawing at me inside, and I'm not sure how much longer I can keep it bottled up." Sammy provided her details, and in minutes, I located his social media page and obtained his photo. That's when I felt like I recognized his face. It seemed familiar, but where and when had I encountered this face before? Glancing at my watch, nearly lunchtime, I contemplated calling Claire, perhaps to arrange a meeting or simply to stir things up. My heart sank as I dialed her number. The knot in my stomach tightened as I heard her answer. "Hi, darling," she greeted, recognizing my number. "Hey, sweetheart, what's your lunch plan? Any chance we can meet up?" Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I have an appointment in 30 minutes that will take up the whole day. I was just going to grab something quick at the grocery store nearby. Everything okay? What's up with the meeting? Anything interesting? Just the usual routine with a new client. It's Mr. Stone's, I think. Her words cut through me sharply, as if she was deliberately taunting me with his name. I held my breath for a moment, trying to keep my composure. Nice. Are you around? Her voice came through the earpiece. Yes, I'm here, you damned cow. That's strike 3. Both you and Mr. Damstones will face consequences soon. No reprieve, no mercy. It's going to be a complete scorched earth. Yes, honey, I'm here. Sorry, I got a little lost in thought for a moment there. Anyway, I have to run, and I know you have to get ready for your meeting too. Have a good time, and I'll catch up with you later, okay? Bye. Love you. Bye. I ended the call, seething with rage, and sat there gritting my teeth when my secretary popped her head in through the door. Steve, I'm heading to the grocery store nearby. Want me to grab you anything? I pondered for a moment. Yeah, surprise me. Just make sure it's substantial, hearty, with plenty of red meat. I'm craving something to really sink my teeth into. She gave me an odd look, then nodded before closing the door. She couldn't shake the feeling that her boss was acting strangely. He'd been holed up in his office all morning, business as usual, but there was an undercurrent. Something was brewing. She just knew it. Sammy dialed her sister's office and stepped into the lobby to find her sister exiting the elevator alongside a tall, dark-haired man. He looked to be around 30, a few years older perhaps. She recognized him from his photo on the internet, Bob Stone's. Standing before her sister, who seemed taken aback, Sammy asked, "What are you doing here?" Her sister's discomfort was palpable, her plans clearly disrupted. "I just thought I'd swing by to see you and maybe grab lunch," Sammy said with an innocent smile. "Well, Mr. Stones and I have a business lunch planned, so maybe another time," her sister interjected, extending her hand to him. "Bob Stones." "Pleasure to meet you," Sammy replied. "How long have you known Claire?" Bob seemed momentarily puzzled by her question. Claire began to pull Sammy away. "Listen, Sammy, we really have to go. We have a meeting. Catch up with you later." Sammy grinned as she observed the couple exiting the premises and stepping into a waiting taxi. She caught her sister's glance as the vehicle drove off. I sat in my office, indulging in a hefty slice of pie laden with red meat, relishing each bite as I contemplated my next moves. With confirmation from Sammy that Claire had left her office, I phoned her secretary to learn she'd be out all day. Well, isn't this just peachy? Financial matters sorted, locksmith ready, lawyer primed. Tonight was meant to be the first step. I planned to toy with this couple before making a move. My old man's advice echoed in my mind. Keep it simple, be direct, obliterate them. Few words, but potent. Maybe something I'd forgotten. But it was coming back. It was imminent. That evening, I was at home when Claire walked in. She looked her usual beautiful self, nothing out of the ordinary. She smelled normal too until I went in to kiss her. The unmistakable scent of men's cologne lingered faintly. She noticed my gaze. I didn't say anything, kissed her lightly on the cheek, and headed for the door. "Where are you headed? Everything all right?" "I'm all right, just got a problem to sort out. Heading over to Jerry's. He asked me to join a poker game with some work buddies. Figured it might help clear my head. Won't be out too late." With that, I shut the door, gritted my teeth, and hopped into my car, easing down the driveway. I drove to Jerry's, parked in front of his house, and he guided me into his garage. Jerry and I go way back. He's always been a bit of a rebel and had run-ins with the law in the past. But with his combat skills, he's just the ally I need for this. You don't mess with a cage fighter. Jerry's a big guy, just over 6 feet tall and weighing about 198 pounds. All muscle. Trust me, you don't want to cross him. With a personality to match his size, he's a force to be reckoned with. But we've been close pals since school. I gave Jerry a call earlier, and he offered to assist in any way, no questions asked. Exactly the support I need. We quickly slipped into the garage, and I changed into dark overalls and a matching ski mask. We stood there like two silent performers, not uttering a word as we climbed into the inconspicuous used car he'd arranged. There was nothing remarkable about it. As we strolled slowly across town to the address Sammy provided, we remained silent. We'd planned it all out in advance, so there was no need for conversation. Jerry parked the car near Bob Stone's house. There was no activity visible except for a single light on. We waited quietly. When the front door opened, we observed him exiting, getting into his car and driving off. Jerry trailed him at a safe distance, and since we knew his destination, there was no need to rush or feel anxious. Parking at the training field was hassle-free. We remained in the car while Bob Stones retrieved his customary 50-ball bucket, a routine he apparently followed weekly. It's remarkable what you can learn online with the right search. We settled in, the radio softly playing Kenny Rogers in the background. Jerry glanced at me as the lyrics filled the air, then reached over and muted it. We sat, watching and waiting. The tension inside me was nearly unbearable. It took immense effort to remain composed and resist the urge to confront him directly. But such a move would be risky. As the parking lot gradually emptied, leaving only a couple of other cars, we both tensed when we saw him approaching his vehicle. Jerry stealthily exited the car and approached our target. Bob Stones was still recovering from his last golf swing practice. As he opened the trunk to stow his clubs, Jerry swiftly seized him and shoved him into the trunk alongside his equipment. A precise punch to the jaw rendered him silent. With Jerry's background in cage fighting, he swiftly gained the upper hand, subjecting Bob Stones to intense pain for the next 30 seconds. Satisfied with the punishment, Jerry shifted his focus to Stones' groin, delivering several blows until he cried out and lost consciousness. Jerry shut the trunk and swiftly returned to the car, where I calmly drove us out of the parking lot without attracting attention. "Everything went smoothly," Jerry remarked, removing his gloves and mask. "Thanks, Jerry. I owe you big time," I acknowledged gratefully. "No worries, buddy. Anytime. I'll always have your back, and there's no way to repay what you've done for me," Jerry replied. "That's what friends are for. At least your hands are intact, and there were no security cameras in the parking lot. So, all in all, a job well done. Let's head back and kick off this card game. The others should already be there." We returned and indulged in a friendly game of poker for the next 4 hours, just for amusement, with no high stakes involved. Being friends, we understood the unspoken rule. Friends don't take advantage of each other. The atmosphere was pleasant. Everyone was aware of the situation and offered their support throughout, which bolstered my confidence about what I knew I would soon have to confront Claire about. But before that, I planned to toy with her. I stumbled through the door a little past 1 a.m., exaggerating how much I had drunk. Jerry arranged for one of the guys to drive my car back. Claire was awake and waiting. It was time for a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Darling, why are you still up? I mentioned I might be late. Are you all right?" She scrutinized me closely. Jerry and the guys just dropped me off in my car. Concerned that I might have overindulged in JD again, I flung my jacket toward the coat rack and missed by a mile. Collapsing onto the sofa, I gazed at her. Claire sat with her arms folded, wearing a disgusted expression. I met her gaze with wide eyes and a blank expression. "What?" she snorted, clearly itching to say something. "Go ahead, spill it. What's wrong, Steve? Is there someone else or something else? You've been acting strangely lately." I chuckled, suppressing the rising anger. "All in good time, Claire. Take a chill pill. I'm fine, my dear. It's just been a rough patch lately. It'll all be over soon." Claire studied me, my words echoing in her mind. She seemed uncertain, but there was definitely something brewing. We retired to bed. I pretended to drift off, apparently falling asleep almost instantly. This irritated her, fueling her readiness to confront me. But I remained passive. The following morning, Claire rose early to prepare coffee while I stumbled down the stairs, feigning a hangover. I stumbled into the kitchen. "Good morning, darling. How are you?" "Thank goodness I'm feeling better now. Do you have anything for this headache?" She tossed some pain relievers my way as I sipped my coffee. She appeared composed. I noticed her phone on the kitchen table and wondered if someone had called her. Claire caught my gaze on her phone, and I sensed her urge to grab it, but doing so would have seemed odd. Pouring myself more orange juice, I casually picked up the phone and saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. So she got the message somehow. I quickly glanced at it before sliding it back to her. "Needs charging, sweetheart. Wouldn't want to miss any messages due to a dead battery." I exited the kitchen to get dressed. Claire watched me, sensing that something was amiss, and Bob hadn't texted her this morning, as he had been doing for the past few weeks. But he couldn't know, could he? She dismissed the thought. She hadn't been that careless, and it had only been a brief fling. There were a few lunches, dinners, a couple of outings, and, of course, 3 hotel stays. Not that she was counting. It was just safe fun, she rationalized. And Steve would never find out, would he? This thought made her pause. When was the last time she and her husband had been carnal? She couldn't recall. Perhaps that's just how it was. She needed to address it promptly. She had become so consumed by Bob that she overlooked what was right in front of her, the one thing that could raise Steve's suspicions. I hurried down the stairs and dashed out the door, evading Claire's attempt at a deeper kiss. Waving and smiling, I drove off around 11 a.m. for work. Feeling playful, I decided to text Claire. "Apologies for today, my dear. I've got a lot on my mind, but it'll sort out soon. Love you. X." I reclined in my chair, waiting for a reaction. Shortly after lunch, Sammy rang me up. "Steve, what's the deal?" "What's up, Sammy? Bob Stones was discovered smacked in his car trunk by a golf club worker today. Claire mentioned it. She's pretty shaken." I reassured her these things happen sometimes nowadays, especially when it's someone we know, but we shouldn't dwell on it too much. "You weren't involved, were you?" "Wow, was he seriously injured?" "I can't say it's a loss, but no, I had no part in it. He's just a bit roughed up. Heard he has some cuts and bruises, but nothing serious." "Did you find out how she found out?" "Yeah. She had a meeting scheduled with him today, and his company called to say he was in the hospital. His wife made the call. Seems sweet. Believable, but convenient. Maybe they won't have it so easy next time." "What do you mean, Steve? Accidents happen in strange places." That night, Claire wasn't home. Her car was gone, and there was no note. I dialed her phone. "Where are you, honey?" I asked cheerily. "Oh, I'm at the hospital visiting a friend. I'll be home soon. I'm on my way." "All right. Hope your friend improves. Anyway, see you soon, love. Love you. Bye." I hung up before she could reply. 30 minutes later, she returned, looking worn out. "How's your friend? Hope it's nothing serious and she gets discharged soon." Claire seemed about to speak, then changed her mind. "Oh, yeah, it's not too serious. She just took a fall and got some nasty bruises. We'll be back home in a few days. This coffee is good." "Yes, thank you," Claire replied, taking a sip. "The other night, one of my company's representatives was attacked," she mentioned, leaving the statement hanging for a reaction. "Oh, God. Really? What happened? Was he smacked and left in his car overnight?" "Yes, unfortunately. Bob wasn't severely injured. It seems like they just wanted to thrash him up for no reason. Nothing was stolen." "Strike 4. This is the same Bob you claim not to know. Cow," I muttered to myself. Claire noticed my gaze and realized her mistake. She quickly tried to cover it up, but it was too late. Now she knew I knew. Hurriedly, she made her way to the exit to change clothes. I suspected she might receive a phone call any second, but from whom? I realized I needed to reassess my plan as things were progressing rapidly. Calling out to Claire as she ascended the stairs, I informed her that I needed to step out for a while to handle something, assuring her not to worry and that I wouldn't be gone long. I drove to Bob Stone's home address and knocked on the door. It opened to reveal a petite, dark-haired woman standing before me. "Mrs. Stones, you don't know me, but I need to discuss something delicate with you. Can I step inside for a moment?" She regarded me with a mix of nerves, curiosity, and caution. "I'm Steve Ryland. My wife, Claire Ryland, is having an affair with your husband." I paused as a blend of realization and horror flickered across her face. Stepping back, she motioned for me to enter, leading me to the living room. "I assume this concerns both of them," she said, pain evident in her eyes. "Yes, unfortunately. They've been having an affair, and I only discovered it a few days ago. I'm sorry to have to bring this to your attention. I also know that he's currently in the hospital." Her demeanor seemed to collapse inward, tears streaming down her face for several moments. "I suspected as much. I knew he was at it again," she spat. "I'm filing for divorce from Claire. She's had ample chances to come clean, and I can't tolerate her deceit any longer. I'm not certain how long this has been going on, but the fact that she betrayed me is enough. I can't forgive or forget." "Does this relate to the thrashing he endured last night?" I met her imploring gaze and swiftly made my decision. "I can't say. I had no hand in it whatsoever. The whole thing caught me off guard, leaving me just as stunned. Whoever did it, I can't say I'm upset about it. Sorry, but that's how I feel. Could he also be involved with someone else's wife? Nothing would surprise me." "Well, he can stay far away from my doorstep. I've had my fill of this. That's why we're back here, because he cheated." I left her still seething after providing her with the contact information for my locksmith and lawyer. Dear, oh my God, what a mess. I hopped into my car and made my way to the hospital, which was just 10 minutes away. I arrived even quicker. Passing through the lobby, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, almost allowing a smile to break through. Squeezing into the elevator, I ascended to the 4th floor where a certain Mr. Bob Stones resided. Consulting the patient directory, I located his room in a side wing. Slipping past the nurse's station without notice, I entered his room and quietly closed the door behind me. Upon entering, he gave me a puzzled look. Approaching his bed, I examined his bandaged face. One eye was shut, the other bloodshot. He strained to focus. "Jerry did a commendable job," I mused, scrutinizing him. "You seem to be having trouble recognizing me." "Bob, take a moment to think. I'll wait," I said, grinning as he cast me a bewildered glance. I settled on the edge of his bed. Peering through his facial bandages, I noticed a severely bruised eye and suspected issues with his jaw. "It's inconsequential." Surveying the elevated bedding supporting his lower body, I winced. "This looks awful. You must be in pain, right?" Swiftly snatching the emergency button from him and tossing it beneath the bed, I playfully jabbed his ribs, prompting a squeal. "Still pondering my identity, Bob? Need a hint?" His face retained its mix of confusion and curiosity. "Let's see. Reflect on the married women you've been involved with and the marriages you've disrupted. Does that jog your memory?" His eyes met mine, revealing a mind working overtime to piece things together. Another moment elapsed as I savored his evident distress and uncertainty. "Need a nudge, Bob? Think about it. I'm tied to a woman named Claire. Does that jog your memory?" Recognition sparked in his eyes. "Got it now?" I grinned, fierce as a pre-dinner tiger. He nodded in understanding. "Great. Glad we've cleared that up. So, wondering about my presence here? Let's get to it. I'm here bearing a message from your wife." Pausing for comprehension, I mimicked a throat clearing, noting his impaired speech. "She wants you to hear this. Here's the gist. Stay away. Don't show up. Divorce papers are coming your way. And just so you know, you're truly contemptible." A tear welled in his visible eye. Chuckling, I observed his restricted movement and leaned in to meet his gaze. "I'm ending my marriage because my wife found pleasure with someone like you. This is just your starting point. We'll encounter each other again, guaranteed. I'll disrupt your life as you've disrupted mine. I won't relent, so be prepared to run. By the way, I'm not responsible for this to you. Just a heads up." I wanted to keep him guessing. Raising my fist, I struck his exposed eye. I heard a crunch. Not a big deal. Then a sudden hit to my groin. He yelled and then blacked out. I stood up and exited the room. Was I content? Far from it. But it was a beginning. He'd lie there, realizing his error, unable to act. My departure was unnoticed. Had anyone seen, they'd have noticed my wide smile. I drove home cautiously, gearing up to address my other issue. My anger was contained. Once retaliation started, it was a path I'd eagerly pursue. While the end of my marriage deeply saddened me, her betrayal left no chance of reconciliation. My only solace? Those who wronged me would soon experience even greater pain. I don't easily forgive. Bob Stone's card hinted at a future encounter. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed Claire's car exactly where she'd parked it just 2 hours prior. Absent-mindedly, I tapped its hood as I headed to my front door, contemplating this might be my final entry as a married man. A leaden feeling consumed my heart upon entering. The accumulated anxieties of recent days felt tangible, pressing down as I made my way to the living room. Approaching the door, I caught the faint sound of the TV. I paused, fixing my gaze on her. Claire was seated on the sofa, exuding palpable fear and apprehension, as though expecting imminent repercussions. She seemed to sense the culmination of our charade, though no words had been spoken. Her hands quivered as she tried to maintain composure, while I stood observing. Lifting her eyes, fear was unmistakably present. Her lips moved, attempting to speak, but no words emerged. I entered, passed by her to pour myself a JD over ice, and set the glass on the table between us before sitting. Meeting her gaze, I detected her fear, coupled with a hint of defiance. Silently, I reached for my drink and savored a slow sip. Feeling its warmth as it went down, my eyes locked onto hers without wavering. She waited. Let her wait, I mused, taking another deliberate sip, maintaining my silence. My face remained impassive as I observed the woman I once deeply loved staring back at me. Though my heart still harbored strong emotions for her, they were now tempered by the pain she'd inflicted without cause. It was time for her to understand my anguish. While I gazed at her, she found no hint of optimism in my expression. We had said so much already. Wordlessly, Claire seemed to gather herself, standing taller as if choosing bravery. Unaware of my knowledge and unable to bear the weight of my silent accusation, she broke the silence. "Where did you go?" Her eyes revealed her anxiety while I remained motionless and quiet. "Speak to me," she pleaded. I leisurely took another sip of my JD. "Nothing like JD after a hectic day," I mused, noting her growing distress. "What's bothering you, Steve?" she snapped, frustrated by my silent response. "Fine, Claire. I'll share my whereabouts if you disclose yours. Deal?" Her eyes met mine, cautious and wary, each of us sizing the other up like wary boxers, uncertain of who'd strike first and wary of the counterpunch. I mentioned being at the hospital visiting a friend. "What's your point?" She reclined in her chair, arms folded, satisfied with her initial response. I leisurely took another sip of my JD. "Darling, I anticipated that response. Care to reconsider?" Her composed facade wavered, fear evident in her eyes. She was becoming anxious. I had indeed been with my friend, just as I'd stated. "Claire, what's causing the confusion? I'll clarify. I was visiting a friend," I began. "Though our relationship is recent, we're growing closer." I scrutinized her reaction closely. Despite her efforts to remain poised, the defiant tilt of her chin betrayed her. "Did I discuss her husband, Bob Stones? Does that name ring a bell?" I hinted. A change in her demeanor was clear. It seemed her husband had an accident and was hospitalized. Though not severe, he had suffered significant bruises. "He's recovering well, which is a relief, isn't it?" I teased, watching Claire's face redden, sensing her apprehension. "So, what was your conversation with Mrs. Stones about?" she inquired, both eager and fearful to know. From what I gathered, her husband appears to be a consistent womanizer or cheater. Upon discovering his infidelity, I believe she deserved to be informed. "Oh my God," she exclaimed, feeling a constriction in her throat akin to a noose tightening. "Are you all right? Can I get you a drink? Do you know about Bob Stone's indiscretions?" I took a sip of my drink as she struggled to respond, her words failing her. "Let me assist you," I said, looking deeply into her eyes, hoping she'd sense my sincerity. "I'm aware now." Her eyes widened and she covered her mouth in shock. Observing her face, I saw a mix of disbelief and surprise. Despite seeking some support, my expression remained impassive. "I'm aware of your involvement with Bobby, darling. I've known for some time. Not an eternity, but enough. So, if you have something to confess, now's the time, before you leave." Downing my drink, I rose to refill it. "You sure you don't want one?" I asked, maintaining composure under the circumstances. She nodded, and I poured us both generous drinks, returning to sit across from her. Claire took a long sip before speaking. "It was meaningless, just physical. It meant nothing." "Really? It meant absolutely nothing? Remember our vows?" Her mention of the common "it was just love-making" excuse ignited anger within me. "It was a fleeting moment, Steve. It just happened." "Seriously? Just happened? Such things don't just occur spontaneously. It requires two consenting adults, planning, and agreement. Don't belittle me. You and Bobby have been deceiving me for weeks, maybe even months, but it ends now. Both of you can go to hell." It only happened twice, and honestly, it wasn't that enjoyable. The idea was enticing, but the act itself was overshadowed by my constant fear of you discovering it. "Well, I've finally uncovered your deceit. I hope jeopardizing our marriage was worth it. Steve, I am genuinely sorry. It was meaningless, and we can work through this. I'll make things right and follow whatever you decide." A sudden, almost manic laugh escaped my lips, causing her to look at me with a realization that this situation was grave. "It was an error, but we can mend it. I regret it deeply." "Sure, you regret being caught. Would you have stopped if you hadn't been discovered?" "I doubt it." All the usual excuses pour out so effortlessly from someone unfaithful. Your lies, ever since this began, are just as fluent. You may believe them, but I certainly won't. Honestly, the woman I once loved and married seems lost. I don't even recognize you anymore." My words seemed to cut through her pretense, and she realized the gravity of our situation. "What should I do, Steve? I'll do anything. Is it over between us?" While I was away, I reached out to Sammy. She's aware of everything too. She'll be here shortly to pick you up. "But where will I go? Are you throwing me out?" Her shock became evident as she processed the situation. "You're free to go wherever, you deceitful person. Maybe back to the hospital to see your other man. I don't give a damn. What matters is that you leave. We're finished." I took the last sip of my drink and set the glass down with a firm thud, signaling the conversation's end. Claire stared at me, shocked, when a knock interrupted us. Rising, I greeted Sammy at the door. "How did everything go?" she asked as we returned to the living room, observing her sister, who was now crying uncontrollably. her shoulders heaving. "Just get her out of here, Sammy. I hate to be so direct, but if she stays, I'm concerned about what I might do. Despite her betrayal, I still have feelings for her. Please, make it quick. Thanks for handling this, Sammy, and I'll touch base soon." I poured myself another drink as Sammy efficiently packed Claire's belongings. Over the next few days, I heard my wife's cries while watching her sister pack and stuff her things into a few suitcases. Removing her from my home took less than 10 minutes. The true challenge lay ahead. Removing her from my life entirely and healing. Retribution would aid in this journey. That's what I awaited now, along with another stiff drink. I gazed at the flames of the bonfire I'd lit in the backyard, consuming all of Claire's belongings. She had no place in my home anymore. "Damn you," I muttered, finishing the bottle and tossing it into the fire.